Hello and welcome to episode 137 of the Imperial Truth. I'm Greg and I'm your host, and it's just me for the first bit again before we go anywhere. Element Games for all your hobby needs. Recording this just as Blood Bowl's going on pre-order, so I'm sure there's plenty of Blood Bowl fans out there listening to this. If you want to go and grab any of the new cool stuff, I've resisted so far. I've just ordered the book, but the teams look fantastic. We've got loads of 40k stuff still coming, and you name it. We got the paperbacks of the Siege of Terror starting to come out as well, which you can pick up from there, so you can get books, all your hobby supplies, all your toys, and lots of other things as well. And then thank you as well to Geek Shield if you've got insurance, life insurance in place, and you want to just double check that it's doing actually what you want it to do. Independent of Geek Shield, I saw someone else saying that they've had life insurance for 15 years and not realised that it only covered certain stuff. So it does happen quite frequently, and what Pete does is he makes it nice and obvious and simple, so you're clear as to what you're getting, and you never know, it might save you some money as well. And obviously, if you don't have anything in place, then he might be able to sort you out there as well. Now, this show, for the main topic of the show, we're talking Saturnine. We finally got around to it. What was interesting was we got about an hour or so through it, and I thought, oh, blimey, we're going to be talking for a while here, and it comes in that section at just over 2 hours. And I think that's enough of a show in and of itself. So if you're after anything else, I do apologise, but Saturnine is dominating this episode. And joining me is Howard, who's been on before on the round table. No Michael, as we mentioned. He's going through some other stuff. You can check out Track of Words, though. He's still blogging. He's blogging about books that aren't necessarily Black Library as well. There's a few more of those coming in. So he's expanding his range of books that he's talking about, and Track of Words itself is keeping busy. He also has a coffee account. So if you are a user of Track of Words and you do get enjoyment from what he's done or from being on the show, you can drop him a little tip on a coffee that can help, support his efforts for a lot of the stuff he does, where he does purchase books, runs the website, keeps on top of it all and everything else. Obviously, you don't have to, but if you choose to do that, it is there. In terms of what's been going on in Heresy, not a lot, is there really? It's so weird now. We're, however many months into everything that's going on in the UK, we're in lockdown 2, so club gaming stopped as well. There's a few lucky people who live with people they can play with, or maybe if you're living alone, you might be able to have that support family or that support household that you can go with. But most of us are resorting to other ways of getting our Horus Heresy fix. I don't really know what the tabletop simulator kind of crowd is. It's not really something I'm that enamoured with, that concept. But you have all of that opportunity, I suppose. I know there's a few people using Titanicus on there, and I think it would work quite well for Titanicus, but as I say, it's not really my thing. Take the opportunity to get some models painted maybe, or we've been finally get my garage done so that I have a really nice gaming space at home. We're a long way off there, but we're getting there slowly. What I might do is actually I might put up some pictures of that at some point soon. We just put some doors in the back of it, and we're getting to a point where we'll have to start thinking about the insides of it as well. And it's not just my space, unfortunately. So we've got to plan that all out so it can be used for gaming, but also more practical, apparently, methods. But that's what you got to do in it. You got to compromise. I'll repeat this at the end, but I'm aware that some people might not listen to the end of the show, and that's fine. That's fair enough. That's cool. But next episode, hopefully, we're going to be doing a little bit on a piece of getting into Heresy. I think we're at another juncture. I've certainly had a few people message me, and we mentioned this a little bit in Saturnine, I think, or have mentioned it recently in the show. There is, I've had a few people say they've read Saturnine and it's kind of given them a bug back. And in general, the Siege of Terror has, kind of relit passion for the heresy in itself, and they're looking at getting back into the game. Seeing a lot of posts of people, not lots and lots, but enough posts of people who are interested in gaming, and we're going to get Howard and hopefully Stu on to talk about how they got into it. I spoke to Howard about it however many episodes ago, but we're going to look a little bit more in depth about that. If you've got any questions or topics you want to bring up about starting off the heresy, I think that might be quite a cool thing to have a kind of input on. So feel free to get a hold of me either at greg@theimperialtruth.com or messages on Facebook via the page or Twitter or what have you, Instagram as well, at Child of Fang on Instagram, at Imperial_Truth on Twitter, or at Child of Fang on Twitter as well, or via the page on Facebook. And help to feed into that and make sure that we don't miss out. One of the problems with podcasting is you bring people on who, I'm not going to podcast with people I don't get on with or wildly different. I don't want to be adversarial like some radio shows can be. So sometimes you can kind of not quite echo chamber, but have a similar line of thought process and open it up. But having other people comment means we can hopefully reduce that effect a little bit. And moving forwards, if anyone does have any ideas for show topics or wants to comment on previous shows, you can feel free again to use those methods to contact us. I always post up the episode on our Facebook page. So if you want to feedback on a particular episode, you can do it directly there as well if you wish. There's plenty of ways to get hold of me, and it's all interesting. It's good to read people's differing opinions. And helps keep the show a little bit fresh as well. Hopefully, got a few ideas in the mix. We'll have to see how that all goes. I don't know if you can tell on the intro, but my throat's starting to play up a little bit. And someone at work, his wife has been diagnosed. Has received a positive test for the COVID. There is a fairly good chance that he's got it, so we're hoping that it doesn't go through our workplace, and I'm hoping to record soon with those guys as well, so it all depend on how well I'm feeling and stuff like that. Might be just being a bit paranoid, you never know, but I'm going to touch wood anyway. But hey, it'll probably be the most 2020 thing to happen. This year hasn't been particularly great in any way, stretch or form for us, so who knows. But looking forwards, we're going to be approaching, everyone talking about 2021 soon. If they haven't already, fed up of this year, understandable. We're going to be looking at hopefully some, maybe a Christmas release for something for Heresy. We can, done it before. Who knows what they're going to do this year with regards to everything, frankly. And then next year, fingers crossed, we can start looking at events. I've got an event in mind, but not even really going to start bothering to plan anything too much until I know that it can go on and I can actually book a date and everything else. But there's definitely plans heading in that direction. It hit me this week when I had a notification that the toll bridge to get over the River Thames, which I used to go to Nottingham, has been, my payment side of it has been inactive for 12 months, which is just like terrible. Haven't been up to Nottingham for over 12 months now. I'm getting a real hankering to head up to Bugman's and to see friends, or even just we were talking about going up to Durham for the Edge of Empires event, but it is what it is. We will struggle on, but I cannot wait to get events back. How many we can go to, it's going to be busy. People are going to be throwing all their events as quickly as possible, I think. So if you have the time and the money, you'll be able to go to one extremely regularly around here. It might be interesting in that it might mix up a certain kind of crowd. Sometimes you can get certain events attracting the same crowd each time. There's only a few changes. But what can be really different is when you go to a different area or an event clashes with something else, and all of a sudden the people who attend are very different. That's part of the fun of these events. Yes, you go to see all the friends I know and have made, but I met them. Essentially, I met them at events when I didn't know them, that kind of thing. So lots of exciting stuff to look forward to next year. I am absolutely sure. But we still got a little bit of this year to go. Lots of models to paint before then, if I can commit myself to doing them. Anyway, that's probably one of the most waffly waffles I've done for an intro to a podcast. So we'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll talk about Saturnine.
What's a Geek Shield? Is it like a breacher shield?
Not exactly. Geek Shield is an insurance service giving you hobby rewards along the way. We appreciate that life insurance is a bore, so we wanted to make things a little more exciting with rewards that matter to you. Cool, right?
Okay, so why life insurance? I have feel no pain. Isn't that enough?
Very different thing. Life insurance can be used to settle off your mortgage, help with raising your children, or cover your funeral costs. It's never going to save you, but it will save your loved ones from financial disaster. Here's what some of our customers have to say.
Pete really will give his all to try and find a better policy for cheaper and give you vouchers. Why would you not do it?
It's great to know I have security for my family. Of that, I am certain.
Thanks to Geek Shield, my wife no questions if I'm still worth more alive.
Thanks to Geek Shield, I get to murder my family in the name of the dark gods and get all the money.
Yeah. So head over to geekshield.co.uk to book your free consultation today. Terms and conditions apply. Geek Shield is not a physical shield, nor will it save you from the Primordial Annihilator.
Okay, well, Howard, we're going to dive into Saturnine. As I said last episode, no Michael for this episode, for this dig in. He was disappointed, but he has stuff going on, doesn't he?
Absolutely.
I mean, he's busy.
I know he certainly was, and anyone who's regular readers of Tracked Words will know Mike's his regular detailed analysis and review of that book, and is a huge fan of that book.
Yeah.
I would encourage people to go and look at that, as he certainly is the the most well read of those reviewing these things. So always good to have a read. But I know he was gutted to miss out on this, but needs must.
I mean, yeah, he's busy enough just with Tracked Words, but
yes,
with everything else going on. So we finally get around to Saturnine. It's one of those ones where, like, this isn't After Eleanor. We're not going to spend 7 hours going through this book.
What? I've cleared my diary, Craig.
Indeed. And even then, like, I think that there's so much in here that it would be a long one of them anyway. So we tried to just kind of break it down into various different bits as we go. I think we should probably just remind people when it takes place. So this is book 4. The traitors have taken a port in the previous book. They're starting to prepare for a proper siege. This is they've got that foothold, haven't they? The Aegis that defends the palace is slowly being worn down. That's the thing they have to do to be able to bring their demons to bear, and the defenders' ammunition is being depleted, as again we saw in Lost and the Damned, like hordes of cultists, etc., being thrown at the walls, and we're at that point now where they can send in a few more forces. If you can hear some atmospheric noises in the background, we are recording this on the Saturday of Bonfire Night. So for anyone not in the UK, we celebrate a mad plot to kill our government, which is kind of apt at the moment. I'm not going any further with that reference. So yeah, we got some pops and bangs going on.
I think we could have easily got away with saying that this was entirely atmospheric sound effects for the recording of a discussion of a siege.
Indeed, yeah. So yeah, we are at the point now where the traitors are really set, aren't they? If we didn't know what was happening, this is looking really bad for the loyalists, and nothing's really gone that well from the start. They held them off a bit in space, and they've bled them and tried to slow them down as they've made their way, to claim a spaceport and to start assaulting the walls. But we've got how many different aspects did we break this down into? We got Cinderman and the historians. We got some perpetuals. We've got Colossi Gate, Eternity Wall Spaceport, Gorgon Bar, Saturnine Wall, the Saturnine Gambit, 'cause they're two slightly different things. And then in amongst that, we've got Perturabo and Dawn doing having like elements, and even within the Eternity Wall, Kroll's part is, although it's entwined with that, it's almost its own sub-storyline in a way. And then right there when we get, of course, Swain as well. I mean, it's only small, but it's pretty significant. There's a lot going on in this book.
Well, it's absolutely. I mean, the dramatis personae at the beginning being 8 pages long, I think says it all, doesn't it? I mean, the number of characters, the depth of the characters, and the settings. Trying to even break that down, and when you start breaking down some of the settings into sort of sub-settings, it covers a really formidable amount of material in one book. We're at, as you said, book 4 of 8. And it feels chronologically in the siege like we're at that kind of point as well, that midway point. It's really engaged. I felt even the preceding 3 books, or excluding the novellas, it still feels like it felt like it had really engaged at this point. And even the opening, where there's a certain amount of fatigue in there rather than nervous exhaustion, it's this real sense of exhaustion, but still getting into the meat of it. And that's even well before we get to anything like the climaxes.
Yeah,
I think, and it just feels like that, doesn't it? I think it's delivered on that. I think that's a feeling throughout. I got, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a number of themes in this book that are fairly obvious in terms of like the Imperium or the Imperials, like, you know, hitting a blow that actually hurts. That ever pressing concept of time, the lack of time that Horus has, is probably more pronounced in this one than it is in certainly the previous 2 books. Like in the Solar War, they definitely talked about, you know, if we can delay them X amount of time, we're doing our job. That was a little bit more kind of seen here. You know, that we have Dawn basically making the choice of which of the 4 conflicts to lose based on how long it will give them. What's the projected loss period, time period? Is it a month, 6 weeks, or what have you? And small amounts of time that they're looking. If we defend this one, it gives us 2 extra weeks. It's not long at all. And then we've got truth. Truth is probably the biggest one. Like what is truth? Well, there's truth and there's the power of myth. And we have truths we know about the heresy, which are so distant from their time period and so confused that they might not be truths, but they're felt as truths. And then when we get into that, we have this aspect of the power of the story, and maybe not telling the truth is the greater thing to do.
I think your use of the word myth there is quite significant and quite telling. I think that fits well with this, because I mean, particularly when you think of the phrase that's often repeated, that the Horus Heresy is the creation myth of the Warhammer setting, or the Warhammer 40,000 setting in particular, and I mean, the siege in particular seems to particularly represent that, doesn't it? And I think there's very much a theme of that focused in on this book in particular, and it really discusses that as a lens almost of looking at the particular events that this book deals with. So yeah, absolutely, we can reflect on that as we move through.
Yeah, indeed. So yeah, we're going to try and break it down almost by storyline-ish. Nothing can be quite smooth when it's dealt with so many different stories. It also feels to me, having read this book, I didn't necessarily think about it beforehand, but much like Unremembered Empire. Unremembered Empire? No, the other one. This feels like a nodal point for stories to meet and branch off. There's a lot going on in this book in terms of multiple storylines and all that. But should we start with Cinderman and the non-remembrances?
Yes.
Because
yes. The successors, perhaps.
Indeed, the slightly more palatable version, because we see here Cinderman at a loss right at the start of the book. partly because of how close he was, I think, to what's been going on, and not having any real power to do anything, or feeling like he has no power to influence what's happened. But within that, Dawn finding that actually maybe it is worthwhile to remember, to have that truth available, to remember the past as a way of admitting that there will be a future.
There's a strange, and as you read across the book and even Dawn internally reflecting on it, it's a strange item, isn't it? And I think it's a great opening because it's quite personal and quite reflective. But there's that consideration of him saying, right, we are going to do this. You've petitioned this, and I think we should do this. We should continue the remembrance mission of sorts, albeit changed substantially, but still the same broad principle of we need to record this. But he knows full well, I believe it's stated, and he knows full well that the version that is recorded will never be made known. Certainly never be made public, and may be completely sequestered permanently. Anyway, but the very act of doing it as a sense of hope, that touches on one of the other themes of faith. Faith in there being a future, and there's a hopefulness. He's saying, I'm going to do this. It's probably not going to go or ever be used in the way that I think it could be or should be, but I'm going to do it anyway. A very interesting kind of point for someone as pragmatic as Dawn to do that. And I think that there's a number of points you see here that you see not a side to Dawn. I think that's too dramatic, but there are little moves that he does that I think are not typical and increase his character accordingly.
Yeah, pre Isfahan 3 or Isfahan 3, I don't think Dawn would have reacted this way. Dawn wants everything to be out in the open. He wants his fights to be honest and honourable and played to Queensberry rules, and he doesn't want to have to lie or withhold truth or anything, any part of that. But he's reached a point where he understands that is necessary. It doesn't sit well with him, but he understands that needs to be done, which I think is really quite interesting. And we see, essentially a lot of the Horus Heresy is it's done as classical kind of the death of innocence from the time before. The Great Crusade was wonderful and everything was going fine. And all of a sudden, the whole world's turned upside down and they can't be the same people they were beforehand. And this whole, we move on to the Saturnine Gambit, is Dawn changing, which is not easy for someone who's as stoic as Dawn. But there's some really cool stuff within that, the whole arc for the historians, because they're used to tell some of the stories of the other storylines we have. So we see them at Gorgon Bar, and we see them at the Eternity Wall spaceport, and they link those stories through really nicely, and also give us a clue as to how, when we talk about those myths, about how some of them may have survived as well. So it's really smoothly done there.
It feels like it does feel like and I mean this in a good way. So it's going to sound negative. They feel like a footnote, and an important one at that. They feel very secondary. While we're talking about them here first, because it just happens to be where we started, it is by no means a theme. Where perhaps it is. I mean, I think it would be. One might expect. I mean, we've probably a large number of people have probably listened to interviews or read interviews with Black Library authors or otherwise, and it's become a relatively recurring idea, or otherwise as a viewpoint character to use humans to view the superhuman and transhuman of the characters that you tend to see in the Heresy. These massive events, the best way to look at that is through a human character. That is not the case here. They are present, and in a couple of cases they are significant. And as you say, provide a good point of view, a way of telling a certain story. But it hasn't become. This is very much a big events and big names story. It's epic in those respects. It then switches very well judged. I think it's one of the great successes of this is it switches to those more personal touches, of which these are one of several, and you get that with both Astartes characters and human characters and others throughout. But I thought there are other books that perhaps would have chosen to make these roles more significant, and here I think it's interesting that they're there and they're a continuous thread, but they're not as prominent as they might have otherwise chosen to be. I think it's a really interesting decision.
They are also, you say they're not. I say they're not a theme within themselves. There's small aspects of that, but they are a vehicle by which other themes are shown.
Agreed.
And particularly when we get to that myth section, how important, and we, Dan does link sometimes forwards to 40k, and this book particularly they've obviously chosen in their meetings chosen to do it at a certain point. And they're like, hold on, we're going to have to deal with, this book deals with a lot of information that's very contradictory. I was surprised that we've dealt with some of it here, but I think it was well done. But even things like, we'll get onto it later, with Sanguinius being able to see, in inverted commas, Angron, and actually they were hundreds of miles apart. That's something they had to, they didn't want to just write it off. So they found a way to make it a truth, but we see aspects of that via these characters, which really allows them to keep the book together a little bit as well in certain points. But yeah, you're right. We really get personal once we get into Keeler's aspect of it.
Yeah,
it becomes,
very much so. Keeler, and as you say, and the sort of the myth part where we follow sort of in the trenches perspectives. But yes, Keeler particularly, and there's some very interesting points that she does, and it provides, I think, a brilliant counterpoint to some of the more epic set pieces, which would be relentless otherwise. And I mean, Dan has acknowledged that in either interviews or in his afterward in the limited edition version of the book. He references that point about being consciously trying to find a variety of ways, because otherwise I think you would just get bored. I think you could easily go through this, given the size of the book and the number of items it has to cover. You could easily get bored, and it avoids that. And I think it's quite telling by that. I think everyone I know who's read it, and everyone I've heard speaking about it afterwards, has remarked on the pace at which they read through the book.
Yeah,
it really draws you through, and I think that's testament to it. I think, and I think there's going to be some inevitable comparisons here. I think I've heard you and Michael make a comparison before with some of his Tanith books as well. That they draw you through that way, largely through the strength of the characters. But it's just very true here. You can't put it down, I find, and that's tough with something of this scale and this relentless nature of what the siege is.
What's interesting is the previous two books of the Siege didn't cover as much as I thought they would. They told their story, but you particularly look at Gav's book, and it wasn't like we didn't progress the story, to use that horrible term, that much. We had one event, essentially two things happening. And we reached a point, and it was like, okay, don't get me wrong, I'm not commenting on the quality of the story or anything like that, but it wasn't a huge scope of actions that were occurring. This does have a lot, and I think once you do that, you then have to have that pace. But, this book potentially could have had less in it, and then you could work a different way, but by nature of how much it's got in it, it has to work a certain pace, and maybe it had to have these in there because of the timings. So I'm just saying that because of the complexity of X amount of storylines, that
I think your point about it being a nodal point, I think, plays on that, and I agree with that. I think, and that may have been a deliberate technical or kind of technical or sort of I'm trying to avoid the word strategic choice. We know that they, as a writer's room, have mapped this out, and they must have kind of ring-fenced their way and packaged effectively the storyline around certain books. This reaches a mid. Well, by the end of it, we were at the halfway point of what the Siege books are going to be. It's interesting that this contains quite so many seemingly significant events, and as you say, preceding books deal with one or two. That necessitates a very different pace, as you say. Otherwise, but I think it would have been all too easy for the whole thing just to get bogged down. And I think it's a I think, a real. The reason this gets reviewed so well, I think, is partly to do with its ability to keep the reader invigorated, or it certainly did I. I haven't heard someone say otherwise. I haven't heard anyone say that they got bogged down in this one.
No.
Whereas I've heard that with others, but I think that's. I mean, it's not for everyone. It's not universal either. It's different people having different opinions on things. This has been universally, generally praised, and I'd like to, while we go through this, try. I know it's been something I've been trying to do while I've been thinking about this, having reread it and reread notes around it, trying to find something positively critical to say.
Yeah,
and it's tricky, just to try and think of how something might be developed or how one might reflect on it, how I sort of try something useful. It's tough because it is really quite so remarkable. But yeah, turning to the specific storyline topics, I think the interrogators, as they become, I think, inform an important role in it, but not as significant as they could have been.
Well, yeah. Although there is that shadow of significance. So
absolutely.
Yeah, we're looking at the proto-Inquisition here. I mean, there's a very strong kind of push towards what they're doing here. They know that the vast majority of people in this universe are not going to be able to read what Keela's finding out from people who she shouldn't be talking to. In fact, she probably shouldn't be talking to anyone herself. But it's kind of, they got that little bit of leeway somehow. And that's summed up once they get to Basilofo, I'm going to pronounce it, who is this really interesting character. And if you haven't read all the shorts, he appears in Misforgotten in the Sons of the Emperor anthology as a little that's an interesting character. I wonder if they use that. But we've got someone here who all of a sudden is locked up for having this heinous knowledge and this ability that the Imperium is definitely not on board with, who was on Terra and left because the Emperor was a scary person. And indeed, the Space Marines were super scary people, but has mentioned that he could kill Horus, and assumes that that's why they've come to talk to him. That's the best bit, I think. It's like any normal person would come and want to know how to kill Horus.
Yes, about time, guys, because I had this tied up. That if that had been there on its own in isolation, I think it would have been quite easy to dismiss.
Yes.
Even having read the short story you're referring to, I still think it would have been easy to dismiss as bravado. But given some of the other events that happen later on, and the reflections on the nature of certain powerful individuals, and particularly those in relation to who had met the Emperor and what he was before becoming the Emperor, and similar, and his place within the Order of Perpetuals. I found that gave it extra resonance.
Yeah, definitely. It ties in there, but also it kind of counteracts this concept of the Imperium are just holding on, because their one way out of this is Guilliman the Lion and Russ return and break the backs, smash, capture the traitors between a rock and a hard place, and that is their one way out at the moment, because they're not going to be able to hold off this siege. Foe has given them a way to win, and Dawn won't be happy to utilise it. Maybe it's not Dawn pushing it, maybe it's Malcador, but you could see that Dawn now might be like, well, if we have to, we have to. Malcador would be much more loose.
Yeah, that's
with that.
true, actually. And you wonder how many other options there were out there.
Yeah.
You wonder how many other options they've got kicking about. I mean, bearing in mind this is in the Blackstone,
yes.
in the Blackstone dungeons kind of thing. You think, how many other options have they ruled out that they might have been able to play some fairly heinous type of weapon that they would just think, well, this will, if we could do this, but it will completely destroy everything we stand for. That's quite a big theme. And to me, it gave a hint of that there might be even other options available to them that they would never have considered before, but they now might be considering it, given the pressures they are under.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, like, the custodians are there, and their one goal is protection of the Emperor. That's it. Like, I don't think once it gets down to that, enemy has a blade at the Emperor's throat, then I don't think they've got a stop button at that point.
No.
So yeah, there's what's quite interesting is you've got Dawn, Malcador, and the custodians, who've all got this kind of level of authority, and they don't always work towards the same goal in the same manner, which is really interesting as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that storyline's picked up moving forwards.
Yeah, I agree, and yeah. Particularly this feeling like we've reached half time almost during the siege. You wonder how much this is setting up certain directions or certain threads that might be picked up.
Yeah, and this is where
in the next second half, because you think a lot has happened already.
Yeah. And the other thing it does, again, I said this before, the important aspect of covering from the heresy from the start. The important aspect of covering something we all know, again using inverted commas, is throwing stuff at us that we didn't know and the possibilities we didn't know. That's why it was so important that John finished Praetorian Dawn the way he did, because you can't relax now. You can't say, I know what happens, because you think you know what happens and you're not sure. So there's this aspect there. Obviously, it's probably not going to be successful, but what it means for the rest of the books moving forwards and the relationships, but also potentially what it means for for 40k. Like, once this information's been known, it is then, once it's written down, it's there. And if this information gets written down in 40k, does some Inquisitor have this locked up behind various, security things of how to kill a Primarch? Like, that's pretty big information, and that's what I don't think necessarily everything that echoes forward like that is designed to do that in its first roll. But anything that does it well will have that echo forwards in time.
It does provide an absolute minefield, doesn't it, for the authors writing these?
Yeah, it's a minefield.
Knowing the weight. That everything, even little throwaway things, might have the weight that they're going to have. But also, it's phenomenal, isn't it?
But also opportunities moving forwards. We've got the gift that Vulcan gave the Emperor when he turned up. It's put in the Golden Throne, and it's like, hold on, is that what was referenced? And all of a sudden, there's that actually opens up a lot more space. But yeah, I really liked the way they were handled throughout the whole thing, and we will touch on them as we go forwards. But I think we probably leave them there. We'll dive into the big. I was going to do the Perpetuals next, but I think we'll do them at the end with the other little bits and pieces because of the nature of what they are. Should we go for Colossi Gate?
Yes.
So what we should.
I'm looking at, as we speak. I'm looking at the one of that beautiful illustration that comes in the book. Those wonderful cartographic pieces that have been put together to really show it and give you the context of it and really try to hammer home the scale of this what is taking place. Yeah. Colossi, one of the four significant locations that are identified in the setup of the book.
Yeah, and even that aspect of it, as we say, Dawn knows he can't save these four. This is Dawn in his element. This is Dawn completely, even though he's fighting Perturabo, he knows how to defend, and he knows he can logically think through, and he's got these four fights that he knows are coming, and he knows that he can't hold four of them, so he'll have to give one up. And by this point, he's had Cinderman, that little bit of luck that you need, where Cinderman's mentions that the Saturnine. He was in the Saturnine quarter, and it he felt it rumble, and Dawn realizes there's this concern / opportunity within that, but Colossi is one of those ones that must be held for those extra few days that it will save them. But by golly, he's got the Khan there. So it's kind of okay for a while. Wow. So this is one of the... we actually get on to Gorgon Bar when Sanguinius was the first moment when he took down the Titans, where it was like, okay, Yeah, we're full on. This is heresy. This is
this is why people are still talking about these guys as demigods 10,000 years later.
Yeah,
these are the moments that strike that. I mean, we've had tastes of them, but this is the moment and the backdrop for those to take place. And as you say, Dawn and others really realizing that you have to deploy those. I mean, Dawn being the person he is and the strategist, etc., seeing them as assets and seeing them as assets that when he deploys them in those locations, they are the most dependable pieces he's going to have to deploy. That, I thought, the setup of that, and largely the reflection that you have with Perturabo making the same decisions.
Yes.
Who's he going to put where with considerable less certainty behind the individuals he's deploying in those regions. But I mean, I thought that was wonderful of Dawn knowing if I deploy these people here, and that interplay of the others knowing that he was making those decisions and doing it that way, and seeing them in that way, seeing them in that light, and going along with it willingly, and going along with it and saying, well, someone has to be in charge. We've chosen you. Let's do this, and the Khan being a part of that. I thought it was a very, very fascinating reflections on the characters of those involved.
And the Khan putting his own little spin on it. Okay, I'll do this bit, and then I'm doing what I want to do. And and Dawn being, okay, I'll have to factor that into my plans. So we have this quite early on. So we have Sanguinius doing his thing, but for me, and I was like that in the previous 50, 60 books, that might be the set piece at the end of a novel. Yeah, and within however many pages, the Khan rides out, and in my opinion, that blew that one away. It was just so well done. And other people, you're going to have different opinions on that, that's fine. But we're only, by this happens like a quarter of the book in, and you've had these...
And actually, I don't know if I'm unusual, and I suspect not. I find myself almost looking at where I am in a book when a scene like that takes place and go, well, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
It's a bit like you're watching any film, and you get a major event and someone's threatened, and you're like, well, we're only halfway through, so
something else. Yeah, something else is going to come.
What's coming? Yeah, exactly. This cannot be the big moment. What on earth is going to surpass this? I mean, this is exactly. You get that sense, and as you say, the Khan riding out, and those who are alongside him.
Well, yeah,
you
exactly.
think the Khan's a big deal. Oh, let's just chuck in Raldoron as well. Yeah. Oh, let's chuck in Valdor.
Yeah.
Oh my! And the people who have been involved in those the war room meetings, I found the war room settings really, really interesting and really exciting for parts of it. Exciting is probably the wrong word, but those parts where they're reflecting and deciding who's going to go where and do what there, and the particular focus of it. I mean, it felt really Colossi felt grim to me, more so than Gorgon Bar. Gorgon Bar was a grind, was a real martial fight. This felt grim with all the setup that took place in it. Yeah,
and we get two rides. We get the White Scars first, which was beautifully written. The charge, the retreat, and it all seems to be setting up. We're fine. At one point they've got to square off, haven't they?
Yeah.
Khan and Mortarion. The beautiful charge the first time, to then top that with as you say, the mixed charge with Valdor leading, which was just glorious as well, was stunning. And then the set piece with the Magnus coming down and helping summon some demons and all of that going on. Like, Colossi in itself could have been a book.
Yeah. Yeah, it could have been.
In normal kind of situation. As I say, the Khan proving every part of his worth here before riding off to do his own thing. What was interesting here is, I like this was almost for me. This was the real war part. Like in terms of glorious battle. Here's what you would read about in a battles book. Almost aspect.
Yes, it felt big to me. It felt quite possibly because we're dealing with cavalry-like actions. The space it took up felt substantial to me. It felt like the area it was covering, and then that has something to do with, I suspect, the pace of it as well. As you say, the build-up and the sense that they're covering
3 major fights,
substantial different distances.
three major fights as well.
Yeah.
But also, I suppose maybe that sallying forth then also just kind of brings notes of the old medieval books, old.
Yeah.
As well, which all play into the kind of the glorification of war, like the old, how it was seen, where the nobles would ride forth and have at them and things like that. To the point where it was really cool, but it wasn't hugely deep, apart from, for me, when Magnus turned up.
Yes.
Which
I think that also speaks to a part of this, which is, I think it's important when you have something like this, something as powerful. A cavalry charge by its nature is a hell of a thing. It's got, you use the word accurately, glorious. It's got this real sense behind. You get behind it and you think, well, this is it. This is victory. It's going to be there. It would be quite easy, particularly with those big names. You're chucking in Valdor of all people alongside the Khan. You know what the Khan's going to be up to, and Raldoron as well. You think these are significant characters. What can stand against them? If what's against them isn't credible, it diminishes the whole. To me, they did the opposition here, the Death Guard in particular. There was a way of getting the Death Guard to come across as this real grim opposition to come up against, and really meaningfully so. Don't you think? Well, okay, even with these cavalry charges and with the custodians doing what they do, up against the demonic aspect of what Mortarion was bringing to bear, and then Magnus gets involved, and you're like, there's a real credible threat here. It really gave a reason why those locations, Colossi being one of them, were so threatening. The sense of what they were up against. It could be as glorious as you like. There's still a real threat here. Whereas if you just felt they were just chopping heads left, right, and centre, and you had hundreds of cultists or whatever, or worse, actual legionaries just being culled by the 100, it would diminish them somehow. It would make them feel less, and I think that would have been a shame. I didn't get that. Did you feel that as well?
No, not at all. And also, actually, what Dan manages to do is to maintain that as you say, that kind of jeopardy, but to make sure the Khan wins and it not being too easy. It's Magnus's story allows that to happen without any Deus Ex Machina or what have you, because Magnus isn't there. He's got his own goals, and we see that in Fury of Magnus, and it's all pretty much explained in that. But he's there, but he's not fully there. Like
he's got his own goals, and I think that Magnus almost directly discusses it, doesn't he? And Araman saying, "Is this a defeat? Have we messed up here?" He said, "Well, no, not really." He said, "I'm sure they'll look at it this way. Of course they will. Of course the loyalists would look at this as a victory. But is it? You think is that what we were setting out to achieve here?"
Yeah.
You could think, "Well, that's sour grapes," but I'm not so sure. And even as you're going through the action, you just think, as long as there is a sense of threat here, if they were just, if bolt shells were pinging off the front of their jet bikes as they were going forward, and you think they were unstoppable, it would have just diminished it. I thought it was a reasonable balance between the two. It was glorious while still feeling quite risky.
Yeah.
And you think at any moment this could go awry.
Magnus,
I thought Chris Wright does achieve that as well when he's seen them write the White Scars in the past.
Yeah, Magnus is on his own side here.
Yes,
completely on his own side. Had he thrown his way, and this is what we see later on with Fulgrim as well, really, had they been fully behind, throwing their whole weight into Horus's / Perturabo's plans, then maybe things could have been different. And this book shows elements, and we know there are elements of that. Right back from the start of the heresy, the whole point, the whole reason the heresy took 7.5 years is because Horus couldn't control his forces. He could only control 1 or 2 or 3 of them, and had Magnus here decided, you know what, I'm going to help out, it could have been a different story, but he doesn't care about that. He has his thing, and Magnus knows best, and that's how he got here in the first place. So at the end of the day, so Colossi allows those huge set pieces, and as you say, that kind of glorious, that whole element of almost old school warfare. And also, again, allows the Khan to get to the position we know the Khan has to be in.
Yes.
Because he does stuff later on and he's not behind those walls. So like they have to break him out of that somehow, and that wouldn't be easy. But I think it's done really well. What really interested me was the greater demons and the white scars unleashing their psychic might.
Yes,
really
absolutely.
nice piece.
Yeah, having something, and particularly when you've got the Thousand Suns in the field as well, and
Yeah.
they're going, well, we're in trouble.
And again, easy. It would be really easy if it would be like, oh, how did why Thousand Suns are losing this, but they're actually trying on this. Oh, white scars overdo. Oh yeah, loyalists need their thing. Well, actually, the simple explanation, and some people might find it cheesy, but I really liked it. The fact that the weather is trapped and has its energy allows them. Essentially, they focus their psychic energy through the weather.
Yes,
and that's partly what makes their use of psychic powers different, and that's been a theme for the White Scars for a while, and shows why they looked the way they did upon the Thousand Suns and gave them plenty of warnings, and it feeds into why the Space Wolves work differently and consider themselves to be different as well, because they essentially do a similar thing via Fenris. There's an
I
element.
could entirely see there being another sort of perspective short story, and I think if this was a sort of more expansive setting or period, I could see something where there's something reflecting on the cost to the White Scars of that, or specifically the White Scars seers. You think their ability, or the way that those characters come across, that they remain relatively calm in the face of what they're up against. They know they are outmatched. They know if they go in on a pure sort of play the enemy's game, if you just go this on a pure power, I'm just going to brute force this, I'm going to go out and use sorcery, magic, psychic power, whatever, in its raw form, they would be swept away. No trouble at all.
Yeah.
Instead, they stick to what they know, and they think of a way around it. And you think that is quite, and that sort of shows that actually if they're sticking to their way of doing it and finding a way to make that effective at considerable risk, turns out that that's actually very effective, and proves to be in a theatre perhaps that they're not massively familiar with. I wonder what that's cost them. I wonder if that there's something that they've had to sacrifice, or it's hurt them in the process, or by using that or something, or they've expended themselves in some way.
Maybe it's the way they've channeled their power for a while, though.
Yeah,
and it just shows the difference when people talk about the Council of Nicaea. I do think some people don't necessarily see a difference between sorcery and psychic power, and I do. And whether I'm right or they're right, who knows? Whatever. But there is a different approach from the White Scars. They know what they're dealing with, and they utilise a method, almost like purifying it in the way they are utilising it. They have a where Magnus and the Thousand Suns draw directly from the warp, they have this unending pool of power that in the end will consume them if they do it. The White Scars utilise a limited pool of power because they drain it through the magic they're using, through the weather that they're using, which means they could only do this once, and then they were spent. But it was enough.
Exactly. They could only do it once, and then they are spent. Exactly. What does it cost them? This is their one time to play that card, because it's a sort of self-limiting, isn't it? It's a self-limiting. They've chosen to do it this way, and they are choosing not to completely lose themselves and give in to that. They use that as a way of self-control, and I think that exemplifies that. And as you say, the seers of the Space Wolves are similar.
Yeah, and it allows nuance with Psychers then. Again, for the greater universe of 40k, it allows X-Psyker and X-Psyker to go against each other and there to be a differential in power or what have you, and yet still achieve results that might not be the ones you think of on paper. It allows explanation and creates greater story opportunities, which I really like as well. Greater
interactions as well. It just, rather than these two things coming up, two identical things or two very similar things matching up against each other, it's as you say, nuance. It's providing these different approaches to the whole, to the gifts and the psychic powers that these guys have. you did get the sense that of the loyalists being on the back foot there.
Oh yeah,
that they were using whatever they had to hand, and obviously the traitors were reveling in having what they very much had the upper hand there. I felt anyway, and hence what I mean about it being a credible threat. Like they hadn't brought what they did, they would have been in trouble.
They have you're right. I think they have the upper hand in every single part, every single theatre of war here, except for the Gambit, which was a risk. And if we move on to Eternity Wall Spaceport, they massively had that upper hand, and they probably would have anyway. But particularly when the World Eaters are sent against the Eternity Wall Spaceport, they're just going to kill. They're not going to stop. So,
No.
You can almost understand why they chose that. The fact that does 2 spaceports give them the massive advantage that they, do the enemy need 2 spaceports? No, they can do it with 1. It speeds things up a little bit, but not as quick as losing elsewhere. Does it potentially stop, the argument, does it potentially stop the Imperials being able to use it as a way to get a foothold? We'll worry about that later.
There's too many other factors at play for that to be predicted at this time.
We'll deal with that burnt bridge when we get to it. So Eternity Wall Spaceport becomes that grand sacrifice. Held with enough people enough forces to make a deal of it. What's really interesting at Eternity Wall Spaceport is we have 2 of those other stories. So we have Ol, but also Ol and Kroll, who are 2 separate stories who intertwine. But we also have the General as well. I can't remember his name now off the top of my head. Who's sent here, and the White Scar in charge says. Basically, he's superseded, and he's like, we should defend like this. What was really interesting listening to it the second time was that moment where it was like, the White Scar's like, we don't know what we're against. We should have these roving little pickets and blah blah blah, and we should defend like this. And then the tried and tested Imperial commander who's been told to F off by the Khan because he's knackered. He's at the end of his kind of run of energy, and he's only human after all. And he's like, nope, we'll do it the old-fashioned way. And at that point on the bridge, where he's like, I got it wrong, and it's too late. And it's really quite a moment.
It is, yeah. I thought, and considering that's a character I don't believe we've seen before this book, you cared about that.
Yeah.
At the whole point he was through there, and his interactions with the Khan, as you say, and then the lingering effect that has on that later on, he and his sort of second Bron, I think it is his sort of second Nibiran, I think is the general. Yes. With Nibiran, something like that. The general, he certainly, his reflections on it and the way he interacts later with the White Scars that are there. I thought the Eternity Wall Spaceport was a highlight for me. That was so intense, and because it also draws Camber Diaz's role to a point as well, certainly. And I thought the character of Camber Diaz largely made me choose to start building in a more significant way an Imperial Fist army.
So Camber Diaz is he's been around, and some people like him. But as far as I could tell, everyone was a bit like, he's cool. And then Saturnine came out, and all of a sudden, Camber Diaz is just the man. He is the man. I mean,
there are a lot of significant characters in the Imperial Fists throughout the Heresy books. Big characters, significant ones. I mean, more so than perhaps some of the other legions. Camber Diaz was just one of those who was a sort of part of that group, part of that pantheon of significant commanders, etc. But the way and the role he plays in this is something else.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, so he was there when they dragged the stuff out of Mars. When that all went wrong, and he's been around. And even here, actually, he bless him, he doesn't achieve an end goal, but it doesn't matter. He drew his line in the sand, and he said not one step further, and he did not move.
And in many
step
ways,
back, he did
I'm
not
glad
move.
he didn't achieve his goal.
Yes,
because
yes.
actually, if he had, it would be like, do they all do? If they're all achieving something, well then, again, there's no stakes here. There's no issue. And actually, given that this has to be hard, they're going to have to lose people, and significant people at that. And I thought the scene where his final stand, for me, was one of the highlights, if not the highlight of the book. And that's slightly, even though it's as you say, a relatively it's hard saying this, a relatively small character.
Yeah, if you took him out of this book, you wouldn't notice. In the grand scheme of things, but yeah, it means so much, and it doesn't all happen on camera either, which is another beauty. Like, actually, just sitting here talking about it, like, it doesn't happen on camera. It's just he's there and he does his thing, and then it's brought up later on. Like, yeah, he fell, but that's all that's needed.
It almost has greater resonance for that. It has greater impact for that.
Yeah,
and his story, I think, could be applied, and I think that's his strength. It could be applied to any number of characters in there, because I would argue it happens to a character I think who's introduced into this. Is it Bel Sepetus of the Blood Angels?
Yeah.
Check his name. Yeah, Bel Sepetus, he's a captain of the Captain Paladin of the Paladin Order of Terminators. You haven't heard of him before, and yet you feel there's a whole tranche of Astartes heroes, some major characters, significant commanders, significant people who are absolute luminaries almost in their own light, and yet they're dying in their droves here, and they're having their own little moment like that. Camba Diaz, it could have been him, you could take that moment out, but that story's being repeated in every theatre that you see here, and it's captured wonderfully.
Yeah, you're right. He's like he's representing all those people who died in that way. It's just fantastic. I wonder if there's an element of we're British and we love a story like that. We love a Boromir once he's buying that last stand and what have you, and maybe there is an element of other cultures not saying, why would you do that there?
You could imagine others saying, yeah, but he lost.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, but he's dead, so didn't win, did he?
No, exactly.
Seems the world he just won that.
But
you're missing the point there, though, aren't you, buddy?
Yeah. So. Yeah, I do think it's absolutely fantastic. And then aside from that, we've got Kroll. I think we'll cover like the scenes in the war room a little bit later on when we talk about Dawn. But Kroll decides to be here. Kroll's a character who we don't know a great deal about. You can play her. I played her on the table quite a few times, but there's not a lot written about her at all. What's interesting is the way her power seems to be much more focused. Like people can't see her, which allows Ol to see her enough at the right times to represent this aspect of the Emperor, which is interesting. I don't mind it. I think in terms of the story, it works fine. I think if you delve into it a little bit more, it's like, okay, maybe it's just because she's the top one that she's like her pariah gene is stronger because that's how she gets command. Maybe I saw someone saying she could turn it on and off again. I didn't get that in the book at all. I felt like she had to demand people's attention.
I completely agree. I agree with you. I disagree with that ability.
Yeah.
I didn't get a sense of her ability to turn it on. Like many things, you're like someone who is predisposed to a certain character style or a particular emotional trait might have certain control of, say, I am generally an angry person, but in this is such an important moment, I'm going to try and dial that down a bit. They can do that momentarily. Maybe the pariah aspect is a bit like that. Like, if I really focus, I can try and bring it back a bit, but actually it's always there. I didn't personally get that either from this, but I like everything is true and everything isn't, is it?
The criticism
you do get
was
grades of pariah, don't you?
Yeah.
But I was completely surprised by the representation of Kroll in this.
Yeah.
I did not expect the image I had in my mind from looking at collected Visions of Heresy and Collected Visions of Heresy from years and years ago. That is not the character I expected, and I was really pleased with the way she did come across. It was, but that's, I think, the essence of Heresy. You think you know what's coming.
Yeah.
You think you know the characters. You think you know the points, and actually you don't necessarily.
She seemed to be like tired.
Yes.
Of what she's had to do, and maybe just the fact she's tired of always of being a pariah. And where I say I think people were complaining, the criticism, should I say, was that at the point, some of the points she appeared to Ol, that she was easier to see, or she was, I can't remember exactly, but I was like, actually, she was always hard to see right from the start. She, with people like Malkador and Valdor in a room, she had to wrap her hands on the table to get their attention. And that seemed to be the case. Only Ol saw her, pretty much. Like, even Khan has no idea she's there when she finally dies. It's a flick of the wrist, without even considering it. But she seemed to just be tired of that lifestyle, but also to still want to fight and do her thing and to help where she could.
But what I took from that representation of her and her powers and her, or abilities, perhaps is a better way of putting it, it felt very much like the first time I watched Lord of the Rings, and you see Gandalf and the way his powers manifest in that. They are presented in such a way that they could be nearly natural phenomena,
sure,
exaggerated into something else. And you get the feeling here, like that Ol's perception of her, you could read into that, well, obviously it's his faith. His faith completely allows him to see her. His faith in the Emperor means that the pariah ability is sort of overridden in some way. You could read into that quite a bit, whereas Khan has fallen. Of course he can't see her. Or others who perhaps don't have the belief in the way that it's in a true faith sense of the word, can't see her in some way. You could play all that into it, but actually you're reading into that quite a lot.
Yes,
I love that the fact you could read into it a whole range of things. I think that is exactly what you want it to be.
And
could be something else. It could be something much bigger, but equally it could be. It could. If it was too mechanical in the way it was described, I think it would have lessened it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you also have to remember the state of mind and the people in the way they respond. Ol, assuming this is Ol person, is because some people aren't sure. I think it's fairly clear. He's perpetual, and there are we know there and a true perpetual in terms of born one. I think so. We are looking at someone who's not human. And therefore may have powers we don't know about. And Khan is red-thirsted, focused on killing, and, so that all plays into it as well. But Kroll's role, she knows she's a tool, much like the Space Marines, and she knows she can only do so much as what she is, but she does it willingly. But yeah, interesting just to see that kind of how hard it is for her to live amongst others. Fantastic.
But I mean, maybe that, given that we're at Eternity Gate, maybe is this a point to discussing Ollie Pierce? I
think that was my next one. Yeah. So Ol, this person who takes on board the interrogator and teaches him the ways of the soldier.
Good old Harry, yes,
indeed, and as we say, has manages to see glimpses of Kroll acting, and to take that as the Emperor acting upon the battlefield, and does what needs to be done to get through, in terms of raising the banner, creating that bit of hope, just being a rallying point on a battlefield to last that extra bit of time. A wonderful character, if that was the only aspects of the character, I think.
Yeah.
But there's so much more.
Yeah, and the fact that the character already had that. It's tempting to think of it almost like a confirmation bias thing. He already had that belief. It manifested in a different way, and again, great that it showed the range of different beliefs that can exist within the Imperial Army, as it is there, and presumably would go on to become the Imperium. A brilliant character, one that you might. It feels like a very. I feel like Dan is probably really is drawing heavily on his ability to write soldiers, believable soldiers, and his presumably vast amount of research and experience. I mentioned his TANF experience. It felt like that, didn't it, to me? And certainly it felt like that kind of character to the power 10.
Yeah, this was... You could, if you took out the all the sci-fi stuff and plonked them into World War II, you could imagine them in World War II. Yeah.
Entirely. He felt like that. And I think it's good to have that kind of perspective there. And I thought the scene where their transport is interrupted, and what's coming against them, and the way they sort of reflect on that, and Harry's perception of that compared to a soldier's perception of that. It felt very real, and I think can assume that it can only feel that real through probably being elements of it drawing on real life experiences.
Dan's talked to a lot of military people. Yeah. He's written a lot of 40k, but he's also written other non-40k warfare aspects. I've heard stories of him talking to various soldiers and things. Takes it very seriously, and it shows. What's really interesting here with Ol is he's not just a guardsman. So I wonder if in a book or two's time we're going to get a little kind of insight into his head of what his thoughts were during this whole period. Like, how did he end up where he is, and why is someone like that there pretending to be a guardsman at this point? Is an interesting one. You
alluded to that a minute ago. You think he isn't what he says he is?
I think it's old person. I think it is the perpetual. I think so. We break it down, and this was a complaint I saw. That this book has retconned the Horus Heresy in terms of who was on the bridge of the Vengeful Spirit at the correct moment. I would say there have been 3 versions of that story written down. We have had a human warrior who, is Ol, essentially, or his name is Ol, I think. We've had an Imperial Fist Terminator, and we've had a Custodian. So by the fact that we haven't actually had one single story, I don't think a retcon can occur. But even within that, what we've had and what we know about the Horus Heresy is all information we know in 40k, which happens 10,000 years later and is told by a variety of different people, none of whom were there. So the fact that we have a story, it doesn't make it less true as a story, because that's the story that's been told. What we have now is an example where they raises the banner, where he's telling Harry, no, tell them it was the Emperor. Tell them it was Horus himself.
That to me was one of the several aspects that made it feel very real. It felt like that's something
you could imagine that happening.
Soldier would say.
Yeah, and you can imagine that being told later down the line. You could imagine it losing its allegory.
Yes.
At some point, someone goes, "Oh, was it really Horus?" And it's like, "Well, yeah, I suppose so." Right, and then that story's changed.
Why would anyone? Why would almost anyone think that it is anything other than the truth? They wouldn't know. It's perhaps a double negative, but why would anyone think that it's anything other than an allegory? As you say, they might think, well, that must be literally true.
And even
it's the only thing we have in terms of. The only data we have.
And even if they know it's not true, it's a better story. Like literally, the way Ulf says it there, like literally down the line. Do you want to tell the story where they thought the Emperor was coming, or do you just want to tell the big story where the Emperor comes?
Yeah, exactly. And what is more useful to us?
Yeah.
Let's. This is life and death stuff now. We've seen the power of this, and The beauty of this setting is, of course, that it has even more significance than it might do in real life. But it even in more direct comparisons to real life, it has power. The power of story. You said it earlier. It's very interesting. I mean, we haven't discussed this off this recording or otherwise, but I never took that to be literally old person. I always took that to be a person who had a character who had a similar name, deliberately there to introduce uncertainty.
Yeah, maybe. I would. I think if it wasn't, it was revealed later on that, like, no, that wasn't me. I was over here doing this. I think that's got the potential to cheapen that aspect of the story. For me,
bizarrely, I disagree. I personally think it's almost the reverse. I almost feel like if it is old person, I feel like it makes the universe smaller.
Maybe.
It's a bit like Yoda meeting in which I forget which Star Wars film it is, where he's there in the Clone Wars and he turns up at Kashyyyk and, oh look, it's Chewbacca. And you're like, okay, great. He's like, this is a big universe. It could have been anyone there.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I'm thinking this is someone who has given the role of the patron saint, role, the way it's been described, the patron saint of the Imperial Guard. You think, that could be. You sort of assume that's going to be a trooper person coming through the warp, etc. But actually, is it? You think, is he going to have a different role? Is he going to be someone else? What is he going to do? I think this adds some uncertainty to it, which I think is great.
So what the beauty of this is, right, is that isn't... So we get to the point where old dies, right? There's no one left. Right? The Eternity Wolf spaceport is dead for all loyalists. But that isn't necessarily the end of his story because of who he is. So while people think that that's put an end to one of the potential endings, that doesn't necessarily stand true because of what old person is. So we still have all those unlimited possibilities left as an ending. I think if you happen to have someone else with exactly the same name there, or very extremely similar name, I think that might be just, for me, that might be just a little bit like, really? Like, we had to have someone there who was that similar, that influential. I like the idea that Ol finds himself in this other place, and with the nature of being able to see Kroll, and with the nature of knowing how powerful myth and everything is going forwards, that this guy's like, well, I'm doing my bit. I'm not one of the big boys, but I'm doing my bit. And also I like the idea that if we do eventually get round to, like, what were you up to? And he's like, well, I was a soldier, like, fighting on the front line. And, like, Grammatica's been like, why? Like, we had this other stuff. And he's like, that's where I needed to be. I thought that's where I ended up.
But that's absolutely true. And it's a good point. Because he is, I mean, you think it's someone who has lived that life through, and it's pointed out in previous Dan books that a Lanius person has had that kind of, has lived through that life, and he would be, exactly as you've just said, would be entirely on character for him to say, that's where I should be. I should be on the front line with the others. I'm representative of that part of humanity or something. However, the character just didn't come across to me as a Lanius person. It seemed a different character to me.
I appreciate that.
He seemed more... I'm trying to think of a word other than gruff. That doesn't seem a good enough description. I'm sure there's a more eloquent way of putting it, but
my take on it was he's ended up here, and it's maybe not where he wanted to be, but then just moves into it. And maybe you're right. Maybe actually, that kind of whole thing of having someone with a different name, like a very similar name, and history being turned just because of a naming thing. Like, it's such an inconsequential thing. It just happened to be a bloke called Ol that was there. Interesting. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes, because, John's on his path, and we'll talk about that later. We should move on. We've been talking
Yes.
a fair while. Gorgon Bar. So we talked about Sanguinius right at the start, launching the book with this action, just killing Titans, making the rest run away, killing another warlord because he hasn't killed enough already, making other Titans run away, and like the Imperial soldiers being like, "Whoa, we're winning!" And it's like, yay, yeah. But showing the power of Sanguinius, and Sanguinius, I really like the fact that the Emperor made a literal angel. Like,
Yes.
We've never got to forget that, and like moving forwards, the power, the symbology of having an angel leading you, and that's as much as his actions in killing a warlord, just his presence as the angel is a weapon here.
I agree, and I think it's in fact, I think the order in which those things happened. And there's extra things here that were included to sort of show Sanguinius and arguably show what Gorgon Bar was about, that really set it quite apart from Colossi, which again is a bit of a challenge. You think these are two bulwarks in essentially the same defensive line. How do you make them different?
Yeah.
Well, here you go. And you think, we've seen Sanguinius do something like that previously. And the author must have been aware of that as he was going through. Now here, he's doing similar, but in a very different. I mean, I remember reading that, and I preface this with being I got into 20 years ago. I got into Warhammer 40,000 by starting out with Blood Angels, so I'm biased here, but still, I was reading the first time. It was in Guy's book, wasn't it? Where it was Titan Death, where Sanguinius comes up against that Titan. And it's a remarkable cinematic piece. Here is similar, but where I think it almost has more impact is then when you see that as a way of showing the Imperial Army characters and every defender of that wall knows that he's capable of that, so that when they see him, and I think there are scenes here where he sort of almost drops out of a darkened sky, the effect of an angel passing over and going into war alongside you, the symbolic aspect of that is shown to be even more impactful when you know what he's capable of. And you just think, my God, I mean, who else has done that? You've got the Khan riding out in the way that he does, but this is almost a scale up again to that sort of mythological sense of the word. You think, wow, this is where you've got transhuman character, you've got Astartes characters, Fafnir Ran and calling out. And the relief of when he actually reveals, appears, and does his thing, my God, this is what this is kind of really showing off. And I felt that really set Gorgon Bar as a very interesting. I felt it was more martial rather than the grim, dirty grind that Colossi was. And Gorgon Bar was a martial, different kind of level of fight,
and a psychological fight.
Yes,
and that's and that's personified by Sanguinius, and what else it does with as you say, essentially mirroring what happens in Titan Death. As we said, that happens right at the our end of Titan Death. That is the big set piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is your money shot in the movie. Like that is your big, that's your big thing, and it happens. A fifth of the way through this book. That tells you right from the start. This ain't going to be your normal book. This is Sanguinius doing his thing, and it was great, woo! But it's going to get bigger and badder from here, and then he's brought down, and that's the beauty of this story is that classic arc of this person who is so inspirational, who's so needed, who the troops have to have there to keep them going, who halfway, 3/4 of the way through the book is missing because of an ailment. That's affecting him, and he knows it's affecting him, and he knows the effect it's having, and he has that internal fight where he's picking up on Angron's feelings and can't quite work it out, and it all playing into his visions and what we know is going to happen in the future. Really well done, and on top of that, and this these are parts of the reasons why I rate this book so highly. On top of all that, it's also correcting information that has been written in a way that still makes it valid.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is so
finding
clever.
a way, and I agree with you. It shouldn't be underestimated, the challenge that this must be. I mean, if that's laid in front of you, saying that these things have all been written, we want to make them all true. You personally need to find a way of credibly making these all true. These directly contradictory things. Coming up with a way of doing that and being able to then first of all have the idea and then being able to execute that in a written form. That's not easy.
No,
it's done here.
I
thought there was elements of that as well where they took that even further. I mean, you say about his visions, the point where he's starting, you get a point where he's looking through Perturabo's eyes, and you're like, he's about to see the secret gambit. He's about to see this, and he doesn't quite. Oh God damn it!
Yeah.
The real tension behind that, which I thought was really exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. And had they gone to Dan Abnett and said, we need you to do these X things and write a cool novel, then that's one task. At some point, they've said, this inconsistency, this inconsistency, this inconsistency, you need to tick all of these off. You also need to write a book which has 4 major engagements, plus there needs to be X amount of side stories, and it needs to be enjoyable, and it needs to do this, and it's all taking part in the biggest siege we have, and then for him to smash it, this is why I rate this book so highly. But you're right, and so as you say, with Sanguinius and Angron seeing each other, not only do they fix that problem, but they add in that aspect of he's got to not reveal what he's doing. And on the other side of things, it allows Sanguinius then to see that Nuceria has been destroyed, or killed off, which allows right at the end of the book for that little bit more hope, where Sanguinius is running, saying, they're on their way. Like, what we're doing might be enough, and we can have that little bit of hope to end this book, which I'm sure is going to be crushed again, like at some point in the next book. To take that and go further with it, and within all that, you've then got, as I say, you've got on the walls there. We've got another interrogator up there. We've got various Space Marines up there who are like, yeah, we're doing all right. Why is Sanguinius like holding his head? And why did you make that noise? What's going wrong?
He can't be wrong. He can't have something wrong.
If he's got something,
says
we're
the
done.
defender on the wall. You're like, no, you don't understand. He's the angel. Yeah. He has to be okay.
Yeah, and you can see the wall failing.
Yeah. As
that happens, and yet no one's attacking them. You can see as Sanguinius disappears, they start thinking, we've lost this. But nothing's actually majorly happening. I mean, you get to that point where they identify the generals, and they try and work out a way of doing it, and then Sanguinius comes back and says, I can reach him.
Yeah, I'll mess him up.
I got these wings. I got these wings, dude. And then we see the actual physical manifestation of what he means to them as well, as not just the symbol of hope. And the agent, you can see why Guilliman was like, "Oh, thank God you've turned up when I'm trying to set my own empire up, because I just have to put you in a chair. I don't have to say anything. Like, you're the man." But then also he can fly off by himself and take out what a useful tool that is for a writer.
I think that's quite important though, because it's an important point you make, because he has that role. We know he has that role, and I have a suspicion. And I remember hearing an interview with the team of authors saying when they were mapping out the siege, and they went, Sanguinius is everywhere. Yeah. He does a lot, and you think, yes, and obviously he plays a significant role in the closing stages. That means something, like, as you say, Guilliman having that reaction to Sanguinius when he turns up, like, oh, thank God you're here. You are the symbol that symbol still has to earn. The right of being the symbol. We need to see that. It's not good enough, I don't think, seeing simply someone who says, well, this guy's awesome. No. Like, well, where is it? Where's that demonstrated? Where do we see that? And here you do see that in places, but you do see his inner problems as well, his weaknesses, just as much as you see those quite considerable capabilities. But there's plenty of weaknesses there as well, which obviously makes it that much more significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely fantastic. And Gorgon Bar holds in a way that the others don't. So Gorgon Bar, it doesn't have that same jeopardy in terms of the attacks that come at them. But those moments where Sanguinius is falling are those moments where you think this wall can fall. Which is, again, like when we're talking about different styles of writing these conflicts, that is extremely clever and well done. Anything more about the Gorgon Bar? They end up winning.
Would say you make the point about the interrogator that was there. I thought that interrogator particularly, and it may have just been with her interaction with the character Zephon as he's introduced as well, but that gave a sense of jeopardy to me in that area that I thought was the key area for me, and I thought that was done very well. That was genuinely like, this is grim, and it was it was almost more relatable, whereas the grimness of some of the other locations came about almost through the fantastical, be it the role of sort of Nurgle forces and then Magnus's forces as well at Colossi and even those that we look at elsewhere. They're different forces at play, whereas here this just felt like two armies going against each other. Oh, one's got an angel, by the way, but even so, there was something very visceral about that. The injuries that she sees and witnesses, the guy she's talking about, and the way he just evaporates. There was something very impactful, I felt, about that, and I thought that really hit home. I mean, the fact you're chopping and changing between Gorgon Bar and Colossi kind of simultaneously. I mean, even Eternity Wall Spaceport going up against the World Eaters and Angron in particular, an angel of death in that case. It's still, they've got a sense of a raw, unstoppable, chaotic power, real chaos power. I didn't feel chaos was present in the same way in Gorgon Bar. It was Iron Warriors using artillery.
Yes.
But my God, that's still scary.
Yeah, and what I think maybe what does help is at Colossi, as you say, it's fantastical, but also visceral because you're right up in it. Eternity Wall, I mean, talk about being in it. At every point, they were surrounded by it. At Gorgon Bar, she's miles away from the fight, and at one point she's like, "What's going on over there?" It's like, that's the war, right? And she's so far back from it that you can almost imagine yourself that far away from something, and it being like, I don't really understand what's going on here, and then boom, a shell goes off. And you're different. And you cut back to Eternity Wall there. We haven't even talked about Angron. And the demons and everything that went on there.
Absolutely, that's true. I think it was an interesting choice to not use him very much in this, and a good one at that. I think he was almost more threatening with his absence. Yes,
I think you know what Angron's going to do. You don't need to. You don't need to overwrite Angron. The fact that he goads them was quite interesting, allowing himself to be, kind of semi-obliterated, but not. And be there is scary. Like that's showing a lot of these people on Terra, like the real power of the warp and what it can do.
But like you say, that and that's another example of in another book. Probably during the rest of the Heresy series, the book would have ended there.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that scene, it would have ended there with that scene. It was like, that is major. And I think others did, didn't they? Where you've got Angron is blown away like that, and then returns.
We haven't even talked about the heroics and the attempts at heroics of Nibiran and what's his name, the White Scar, in there. But there's too much to talk about. But Eternity Wall was interesting. Gorgon Bar was amazing. But we get to the Saturnine Wall. And we'll do the wall first. So. Interesting, the Emperor's children are on board with the plan. So we have the Saturnine breach caused by the tectonic plates and blah, 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 and the shelling and everything else. And the Emperor's children on board to help out, to be the bait, to be the distraction, to allow Abaddon to lead the spear tip in. really interesting that moment when it's what's his name, the first captain. It's gone out of my head.
Eidolon.
Oh yeah, him. It's like, yep, you've got the first. You've got the third. Yeah. And they're like, okay, cool. How many people? No, you've got the Legion, the whole Legion, which at that point feels like a tipping point. And that feels like, okay, this is the moment where they're gonna really put the pressure on, and it's gonna be hell for the defenders. What's really interesting, it turns out that I don't think it is that. I think it's a mistake. Dawn kind of sort of tells him it's a mistake. But we have the attack. We have this loan of great material as well, the walkers, the transports, which are kind of cool. And Dawn having to move from downstairs to upstairs. He can't be in the gambit, which makes it even riskier if any Primarch turns up. But you end up with Dawn face to face with Fulgrim as the Fist do what they do and become the Wall, which is a brilliant line.
There was a number of parts to this, because I agree with you. It's not, when it said, "Oh no, it's the whole Legion," you think, well, that's a problem. I mean that's potentially final, but the fact that it went the way it did, I think it doesn't feel like it had to, because you think this could be a breakthrough here. Or there's going to have to be some sacrifice on the part of the loyalists to stop this being the end game that is going to be significant, something we haven't heard about up to this point.
So I heard
the fact that Fulgrim was stopped, or rather the fact that the Third Legion was stopped there, I think was important, because you sort of think, well, why didn't they do that before now?
Yes.
If they had broken through, you're like, well, just send. Why didn't they do that earlier? I mean, I'm looking at the map now, and you think, yeah, okay, you want to get to the inner sanctum. Well, just go do that earlier. Just go and hit one of those side walls early. No, because look what happens when you send an entire legion against what is a chapter or thereabouts. A few chapters of another legion are able to hold off an entire legion accordingly. I think it also speaks to what the Third Legion are to say. Not so sure about that, actually. I reckon we've got this because we're the Third Legion.
Well, so Dawn when he's fighting Fulgrim and that cracks on, and that confused me. Fulgrim appearing as himself before revealing his. It did just jump me out a second there. But what you have is Dawn right at the end saying, that they could have broken us. They should have broken us, but they didn't, because they're too arrogant and everything else. I have heard a criticism about this fight saying Fulgrim left too early. So Dawn and Fulgrim face off. Dawn gives Fulgrim a kick in, a proper street kick in, before. So we've already mentioned one of my favourite parts of the book, which was Cambidiaz. This is up there in the top 3, which is Dawn surrounded by the Emperor's children's finest, and then Sigismund. And I think, even that line against Fulgrim was something along the lines of Sigismund's.
Sigismund's courage sometimes outstrips his capabilities.
That's the
Mine
line.
does not.
Yeah, absolutely. But when those Emperor's children are coming in, and then we have a series of characters stepping in the way, was just that. Again, we're talking about whoever it is, big action star who's about to lose, and then the music changes. And
I would love to know. I'd love to have that conversation with Dan if he had this in mind. When did he have this in mind during the writing of this book? I wonder if this was already in play, because as we've said several times, there are so many big moments in this that could have been the crescendo of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the fact that he must have had that, I mean, if you're writing that, you must think, I have nailed this. You must think, this is a moment here that is going to resonate with people. I mean, and it's saying something in this company. But I mean, my God, that I agree with you. It was proper shivers. And I would, to anyone who's read the book, most people, I don't know what anything like the numbers are. I'm guessing completely. Reading it is one thing, and I encourage everyone to read things. Listening to it back with the audiobook and hearing those reading it, I was going to say the actors, but those reading it, bringing that to life.
was fantastic.
It's quite something.
Yeah,
Hearing that over with your headphones on, and that is quite chills down the spine kind of moment, and I think that's one of the moments of the heresy.
So absolutely, it's definitely up there. So I have heard criticism at this point as well of how why Fulgrim gave up so easily, and I'm like, fair enough. I think this is one of those other moments where, okay, so Sanguinius had to meet Angron, see Angron. Fulgrim at some point has to stop fighting this war, and the Third Legion go to do their thing. This is one of the problems Horus has. It's almost set in lore as anything can be in this. That and also it makes sense. The reason Horus didn't win Terra was because he wasn't quick enough, because he didn't have full control of his forces. The Third Legion go off enjoying themselves, and this is the point that brings them to that. And the criticism was, how did we get from that point where they almost broke them? And I think you have to go back to Slaves of Darkness.
Yeah, I agree. To me, it's entirely in character.
Fulgrim.
This is why I'm surprised it's a critic. I'm interested to hear what the criticism is, because to me, it's been not predetermined, but it's been described. It's been built up to that. Fulgrim is this kind of guy. He's going to be mercurial. He's fickle. He could well turn at a moment like this, and he does. Even
more than that. If you just read this book, then I can understand, and you didn't know much about the Emperor's, I could understand it. Actually, they're at that tipping point. He's just turned into a snake being. He's got Dawn surrounded. Go for the kill. Like, don't waste your opportunity. But if we go back to Slaves of Darkness, Fulgrim didn't even want to be here.
Exactly.
Right. He was forced to be here, and he does not care. And he only cares about himself. And yes, okay, he should also enjoy the pain that's being delivered upon him and things like that. It's not entertaining for him. He's fought. Like, there is nothing here that is holding his attention, and it's too much effort. Fulgrim is also he wants. For me, he wants that easy win kind of thing. He wants to always have that power. And as I say, he just does not care in any way, shape or form. And he probably resents the fact that he's forced to be here as well. So he's like, I could do this, or I could just go and slaughter that city and have my fun with them. And as once at the point that Dawn just shows that he's going to be effort, he's like, nah, I'm all right. I'll let my children deal with that.
Yeah, he's actually I can enjoy myself very differently elsewhere. I can go off and do this a different way. I don't. You bore me. I'm not going to engage with this. And I think that's it feels entirely in character.
Yeah. To me, it did.
But
well.
Even so, I think the
executed
that fight
beautifully
is quite something, isn't it?
It is, and was a real surprise actually, because you just. Again, keeps you on the edge of your toes, because you think everything's going to happen in the gambit, in the trap that's laid out, which we should probably go to. Genius from Dawn, not something you expect from Dawn, and where we talked about you talk about up above. Why didn't they do this earlier? Because Perturabo plays the percentages, because to throw a legion at a wall, if it doesn't work, costs you more than it's worth. And the percentage chance of it working, even then, at this point, had the crack not been there, had the gambit not have been an option, Dawn would have had more forces up on top. So if you think about it like that, to attack a fully protected wall would be even harder. So again, down the bottom, Dawn's withdrawing forces that can be used elsewhere for this risk. But this one is one that's...
And turning his own attention away as well.
Yes,
even deploying
absolutely.
himself to it.
Yes.
And some of his most sort of capable assets is one thing. But these are not Legion-sized forces. These are relatively... Okay, they're sort of best names. Of the best type of guts. There's big names, and presumably the squads around them they are the veteran elite kind of equivalent characters specialised in that particular field. But Dawn himself, taking himself out of the equation, and several people warn him about this. But are you sure?
We mentioned Belseptus earlier. Loken Garrow, like these people positioned at points on the line just to stand there, to be that, that's Garrow. He stood up, right? He got out from Isfan 3, so did Loken. Like, these guys are important to take those and to go for that risk.
And 100 of like your best guys,
troops,
who are each with those names that you're talking about.
Yeah,
that's significant assets that he's deploying there. So and it could be that they just sat there waiting, and Perturaba's laughing all the way as he walks through Aurum Gate or something.
Exactly.
He just goes through a completely different area and goes, "Yep, I saw it.
It's a risk."
And you knew you'd try and defend it.
Yeah, and screw you. I have seen someone complain that, minor complaint maybe, that Abaddon's fate here was not worthy. I think, again, so Abaddon leading this strike force in the full belief that he's going to be successful, because that's what Abaddon and the Justair and the others do. And a brilliantly executed plan designed by the defensive mind of the whole galaxy. On top of the issues they have in terms of the bad luck that can occur trying to get through, and execute this plan as it is. I thought it was stunning. And
the main thing I thought it brought was surprise.
Yes.
And I thought, because you're seeing it build up, and you're thinking, I was dreading that it was going to not happen in this book. I was dreading that they were just going to stop and it was going to be picked up somewhere in another book, another book, because so many significant points taking place. The fact that it then took place and the way it went, the way it did, as you say, to have the Justaring, to have the elite, such a storied series of characters, arguably the Mournival as well, Mournival and the Justaring, and it's just all the elite of the Sons of Horus, essentially wiped out. I just wasn't expecting it. Not here, not now.
No.
And I think that element of surprise is the art of the storytelling, surely. That was exciting. You could say, it's not worthy. Well, okay, what is worthy? The importance of who they're up against here. Particularly, the way Abaddon's fight. I know Mike is a big way hearing him describe the fight between the way Abaddon's fight and the way he's sort of internally reflecting while having this unbelievable fight going on is a fascinating insight. To say that it's not worthy is a surprise to me. I think it's a surprise. You sort of expect him to be there at the biggest events, but this arguably is. This could have ended the whole thing. It is entirely logical that you would use the Sons of Horus this way. But again, it's sort of representative somehow of the game as well. We've all rolled a double one for a 3-inch charge.
I also think sometimes people underestimate some of the good named characters. Like you said here, like there are some big names here, like Endridhar, Loken, Garrow, Belsepatus. They say that there. Like there are a number of them, and it cost them as well. It's not like they just killed them. Like it cost them, and it potentially could have cost them more with what's his name running around as well. And what this does, which I didn't think about until, I did think about it, but it wasn't until we started to kind of put notes down. Abaddon's character is very definite in 40k. He gets to say the lines he says because of the way he looks back at the whole heresy. He gets to say that Horus was a fool. He gets to look down his nose at the Chaos Powers while also using their power, because he never gives in. This was Horus. This was Abaddon trying to have a martial victory under his own power, and Perturabo's to a point, but his own power, and it not working because he went up against other people who have their own say in matters. But he, at no point does he feels broken. He feels like he failed and everything else, but his character in that point almost changed from 30k to 40k within that fight. And then the other thing is, as I was just sitting here kind of talking about it, we've talked a number of points about having to get pieces in place. Are you telling me that if Abaddon could stand, that he wouldn't be by Horus's side as soon as anyone teleported onto the Vengeful Spirit. He would demand to be there.
Yeah.
So this probably, potentially, I suspect, takes him out of that action, or certainly takes out the Justaerin.
No, you see, I'm not so sure.
No.
I think it actually puts him in the right place.
Or potentially,
because I think it would be, as you say, I think
but not.
There might have been something if he was engaged on the front line, if he's engaged in the siege in some way. I mean, you get the feeling that these guys are not zipping backwards and forwards between these locations. They're not teleporting here, there, and everywhere. If he's engaged in some way, underneath the shields in particular, underneath the shields of the palace, there's no necessary rushing back to the Vengeful Spirit. Now he's on the Vengeful Spirit.
Okay, but I don't think he's in any state to fight, because if he fights, he stands in the way of the Emperor.
Fair.
I don't think he survives.
Well, he could engage with some of those who go up with the Emperor. I mean, where's Valdor in all of this? It could be Abaddon Valdor at the end.
Yeah, you might be right. I might have to take that one back, potentially. But what it does mean is there aren't 200 Justaerin.
Absolutely agree.
And that's probably the bigger part. But I think
Abaddon will be there during that
it
final confrontation.
Right, yeah.
And I think he'll be the one taking on.
Well, he does lead them away, I suppose. So yeah, but maybe not at his full effectiveness.
No, absolutely.
I think it will play into his actions at the end, but definitely not having however many hundreds of Terminators and their elite. There to rush back to Horus's aid. Yeah, you might be right on that one.
I think it's a way of having Abaddon on the Vengeful Spirit.
Yeah, it could be.
Perhaps not at full.
Too late.
Perhaps still licking his wounds somewhat. But I mean, it depends what the time frame is. I mean, they heal pretty quick. These guys.
Yeah.
Let alone the powers of the warp that are involved. Well, not that he's necessarily going to give into those, but you know what I mean. What I mean is they're going to have capabilities.
I wouldn't be surprised if he's there, but doesn't have either the time or the kind of fortitude to be able to take a huge action, because I just feel like he would end up dying. He'd end up putting himself in the way and dying. But yeah, so maybe we get that as well. We certainly get the head taken off. We get a big blow, but also potentially moving forwards again, another future ramification from not having those guys there. But I just accumulating in Abaddon's in a monologue as he's fighting, just beautiful. Just so many little moments in that. Whether it's Loken and his latent psychic power, which is a nice touch. And still refusing. The talking to Sigismund, talking to Malkador when he's beforehand. It's like we could use you. We're trying to do amazing things. He's like, you're talking to me from hundreds of miles away into my head. Like, are you not already capable of doing what you need to do?
Yeah, you've probably got this.
Yeah,
I'm just a regular guy.
Yeah,
well, we'll see about that.
That refusal.
There was still. I mean, that set piece, that whole setting, that brought about confrontations and conclusions. I would say, well, it is by their nature that I was not expecting at this point in an 8-book arc.
Yes. Yeah, and again, that keeps you on your toes, but also means you're not ending up in Star Wars Episode 3, which some people say the best of the 3 trilogies, but you're not ending up to this point where you have to go scene and stop and quickly to another scene, because we need to tie up these ends. So hopefully we'll allow later books to flow.
Yeah,
the Saturnine Gambit was brilliant from start to finish. Even old Arcan Land just being sarcastic. When he's being kept
a great character, and again a brilliant sort of character to have alongside Cinderman as well. To have their kind of conversations and the conversations he does with the Imperial Fist as well. But I mean the demise of some of those Sons of Horus as well.
Oh, grim!
No, we're trapped here, and we're functionally immortal.
Yes, and there's
some ideas there that are brilliant.
Yeah, that and that acceptance of that, and knowing that they're still going to fight to survive, they're going to eat each other. Like they will, they will hold out as long as they possibly can.
Yeah,
absolutely grim. So good, so good. We should probably cover just a few little other bits then. So, Dawn throughout all this, the meetings with we've had Kroll and loads of other people involved all the way through, but there was always that element of it's Dawn versus Perturabo, and
yes, and I think the insight you get into Perturabo, I think is something that would be easily overlooked in his, because it's relatively minor.
Yes.
The few scenes you have with him, but I think they're fascinating. And again, I think particularly having a viewpoint character such as Abaddon, look at him and go, this guy's impressive.
yeah,
I've seen some stuff, but this guy, there's no one else who could do this. And presumably knowing full well that Dawn could have been a person in that role. Obviously not literally, not with the not with the divide that they have, but knowing that they think this is the best guy for this role and he's a marvel to watch. I thought that was fascinating because it makes them into a very credible threat. It's not a case of you've got this mustache twiddling villain who's inevitably going to get it wrong. It's not Wile E. Coyote up there. It's someone who's a genuinely threatening person who could easily win this if it goes a certain way. If it happens to play out a certain way, one misjudged moment and this guy's won. And I thought those moments, and they're just as interesting to see aspects of Dawn's character as well. I mean, I'm thinking even the doubt that Dawn is having and the regret, you could say, Dawn's having over, did we really have to send those guys over to eternity?
Yeah,
I've already had to deal with losing losing these people. I'm dealing with that. I'm having to bear the weight of that on my conscience. That's just one step too far. So he sends one of his guys to go and look after the general who he knows has been sent away. Stuff like that. You just think that is not what I expected of Dawn, yet it's somehow been welded into the character so that it doesn't just seem totally out of character.
Keeps him in touch with the humanity as well. What I like about Perturabo is like him and Mortarion are Horus's two right-hand men. Like, he knows he can rely on them to kind of do their thing to a point. And Perturabo, for all this, is so resistant to the warp. Just doesn't want to know. It's not his thing. Talon is brilliant when they get to the end and he's like, oh, okay, I found what I was looking for. It's not what I want. It's just absolutely beautiful. And to the point where in this book, he almost seems more interested in the fact that he's trying to best Dawn than and I think than win this fight. Like, it's not about Horus's plan, it's about besting Dawn. And I think in part and maybe that feels that way a little bit to me, because when we look back at whichever book it was, that Perturabo realised he made a mistake when he joined Horus. He wasn't getting what he came for, but he's going to stay with Horus because he won't break his word again. He's done it once, he will never do it again. So I always get the feel with Perturabo, he's here, but he's not, his heart's not in it, but he's such a professional that he'll give you everything anyway. And so this allows him just to, like, he's here to beat Dawn. Period. He is.
I think that's an interesting point. I particularly think that's an interesting point when you consider what we've said about the other Primarchs, the other traitor Primarchs in particular, whose heart isn't necessarily in it, whereas Perturbabo's isn't. But it doesn't matter. He's still going to give it his all anyway. The others are dangerous, that even without their heart being in it, and I'm not sure that's true of Angron actually, but there's someone like Fulgrim, his heart's not entirely in it, but he's still a hell of a dangerous foe because of the power of being a demon Primarch, etc. Perturabo, as you say, not in it in a similar way, but he's professional to the point where he's dangerous because he's going to give it his all anyway. I'm not sure, and that's where I think the interactions between him and Abaddon are fascinating. I'm not sure he wants to admit that to himself. I'm not sure he wants to admit that it's a personal grudge against Dawn that's driving him in such a way. He knows it's a factor, and he probably knows it if he's confronted with it. But I don't think he doesn't really want to be called out on that. He wants to think he's doing it because his War Master has told him that that's his mission. I don't think he wants to be told that he's almost as petty as letting it being a personal grudge.
And and well, I think that element's been part of him right from the start, where he holds it against Dawn without wanting to feel like he's emotional. Without
wanting to think he can be played in that way.
Absolutely, and that's why the whole Saturnine Gambit comes about, because his distrust of the warp and dislike of the nature of what it's doing to his brothers. Abaddon, gives him that chance to win. Like, you can beat Dawn in a real fight, like without using your D6 rerolls we gave you at the start of the game. Like, it's you versus him, and if this works, you've beaten Dawn. But if you rely on demons, is it really your victory?
Yeah, it's like, but you used the extra thing, didn't you? Yeah, quite.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. I say Dawn all the way through in his role, in his acceptance of the fact that he probably knows he can't fight wars the way he wants to fight wars.
Well, even the reflection at the very beginning, the little moment at the beginning of the whole book, his discussion with Cinderman, is thinking over his insight into his interactions with a human.
Yeah,
in Cinderman, his moments of discussion with the command staff of Bab Bastion. I found that fascinating.
Absolutely.
Through to even his reactions with his a relatively junior commander who is near death as a result of going up against Fulgrim, and the way he reacts, again, the stony faced Dawn could have been portrayed very differently there.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And we haven't even talked about the rest of the Perpetuals yet. So that whole kind of the one part that's separate is Grammaticus turning up at Indra's Indra. That's right, isn't it? Trying to remember Urda. Yeah, and having feel like you could read and listen to these chapters and look for clues and find clues that may not be there. We have a Space Marine who doesn't have a Legion, which is interesting and will tie into Valdor, and there might be stories that come from that at some point. But we get all this insight into the Emperor as a Perpetual, as the greatest Perpetual of the Perpetual kind, who appear to be just the latest, kind of genetic mutation, the evolution of humanity. But for some reason, the Emperor was an evolution of that evolution. And what's interesting here is we have statements from her that are negative towards the Emperor. There doesn't seem to be anything she says where there's a need to lie. So I think I add more weight to this than I do to some of the other stories that are told around some of the subjects she's talked about. She admits to scattering the Primarchs herself.
I could not believe that
Phenomenal.
That had come up in this in that way.
So my favourite headcanon was the Emperor did it, because there's a definite, like, you just so happened that Fulgrim landed on where he did, and like Russ landed where he did, and there are some that don't add up, but there are plenty that do add up.
Yes.
So I always felt there was something in there. Someone had a little bit of a guiding hand on that. That was my feel, and my thought was maybe the Emperor knew they were going to have to be scattered, so kind of controlled it. But
allowed it. Knew it was going to happen, decided not to resist it too much, and guide it in the way that he actually thought he could get something out of it.
And maybe that's still the case. We don't know. But Urda saw, kind of the monster that the Emperor could be in her head, of what it would be, and really throws open again. Like, was the Emperor's plan right? Was is he the only one who could see a way forwards? Are these? If it had been left, would we be in a worse position? Who knows? But we have people who knew him. We now have a greater kind of an expansion of what the Perpetuals are, and how many there were, and the society that they kind of had between them.
Exactly how connected they were. I thought that was a fascinating insight. I thought the amount that she revealed about that relationship that she had, the steps that she had. I mean, how the hell did she actually, if she is the one who scattered them, how did she do it? And I did think, though, it was interesting, that whole section, as you say, it felt very separate. It's probably the only constructive criticism I would even consider of it, is it was quite a step out of the rest of the book.
Yeah.
Unlike any other, and you could argue that had a certain effect on the pace. Whatever, it was sufficiently it had such sufficient gravitas that you think, well, you forgive it, whatever. There were major points of discussion that you think, well, this is what people have been clamouring for with the heresy in general. There are major discussions about the massive players and the whole basis of what the whole thing is about. I'm amazed that I was surprised that it dealt with those such things. Do you think it is possible to enjoy this? It's often said that if you read, and you mentioned a short story earlier, that you get more out of these things if you've read some of the other books. I feel that this whole scene is considerably diminished if you have not read Valdor.
Yeah, I think there's Valdor provides a lot of context.
Massive amount, more so than the short stories do typically, or the sort of surrounding stories, particularly as well. Valdor, I suppose, is part of the Horus Heresy setting, or the sub-setting, or whatever the Primarchs technically is, the character series technically is. But to me, that is almost essential reading to understand this scene, or the gravitas of this scene in particular.
What's really clever is, I find with it, is the details that are given up. So the worry is you give up too much at all times, and then you know everything, and you lose that. I think all this did was create more questions.
Yes, agreed.
We don't know anything more about the Perpetuals, really, except there were more of them and they were major people through history. We kind of guessed that.
Yes.
She scattered the Primarchs, and she did it because she didn't think it was a cool idea. Cool. But that, again, we don't know if there were other people involved. We know Foe. Foe's probably a Perpetual. Well, no, might not be, because he said he kept himself alive through other means, but he has a lot of power, and he knew the Emperor in that way.
Yeah, but then technically neither is John Grammaticus.
Yeah, exactly.
John Grammaticus is a false Perpetual he's a non-natural one, so Foe could be the same.
Yeah, exactly. We don't even know. There are classes of Perpetuals.
Yes.
And even to all these people, the Emperor was that unknowable, wow. He's special.
He's something else. Yeah.
Yeah. So all it does is create more questions, in my opinion, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Because we can all argue and discuss everything about that, even to the point of why she got who is this dude, this Space Marine, who's not even Dark Angel, he's not even a First Legion. It's just there. With some
his
name
is Lee2, isn't it?
Yeah,
and it said that the serial number is LE2.
Yeah. So,
Brilliant. Yeah. Brilliant. Second Legion. Wonderful.
Maybe not.
Clearly not, but,
limited edition.
It's anything that is hinting at that sort of stuff,
exactly,
or some sort of, it's just proto-Legionnaire, prototype, effectively.
The second limited edition model.
Yeah, exactly.
It's who knows? All of this, and then Grammaticus desperately trying still to do something right, managing to convince her that she should be involved, and then the beauty line of, okay, cool, where's Ol? He should be here, and that is if that is Ol over on the other side of the world fighting for his life, kind of. I like the idea that the next story we get, and maybe it's next book, and there is, as you say, there is. The one potential thing about this book is, does this story need to be in this book? If you took it out, the book would still work. One thing it does is it relieves tension.
That is the issue with it. It's why I doubt my own criticism of pacing. It may be essential to take you to almost be
slow things
a breather.
Down. Yeah, but if it wasn't in this book, I don't think we would have noticed.
Also, how could you have something that seismic be in a short story? I mean, you imagine a short story which just busts out those kinds of significant items.
And this is where we don't know, because we haven't seen the next book. Maybe it needs to be in this book for the timing for the next thing to happen in the next book. So that maybe, there's already enough stuff going on in this book. It feels like we've got 4 more books. And we don't know exactly what stories we've got to tell. We've got the White Scars assault on the spaceport. We've got Vengeful Spirit. We've got Sanguinius and Angron. Who else knows what we've got in there and how they're going to cover them? There's a lot going on.
I think presumably the demonic and that aspect of it is going to ramp
Yeah,
up as well.
yeah,
Because you've got, in theory, we've got Camp Carbanda and
Yes,
Sanguinius on the wall as well.
Yeah,
We've got the
Sanguinius
Eternity, not the Eternity, the
Lions
Sanguinius at the gate kind of thing.
Lions Gate,
Lions Gate, that's it.
Yeah.
Or is it? No, it's the Ultimate Gate.
Is it
He's at
Ultimate
the
Gate?
Ultimate Gate. It's the Ultimate
He's
Gate
at-
where he stops things.
Oh, he's at Lions Gate at some point, isn't he? This
Yes.
is where I think he gets everywhere. Khan versus Mortarion. Are we going to get to see that fight? Surely we must. And then what? So I'm reading this book, thinking, kind of like, where are we? Like, at what point in the story? What more stories have we got? It appears now that Magnus is out the story, according to Fury and Magnus. Fulgrim's out the story. The Night Lords, they're not there in full force anyway. So we're reducing the numbers of kind of the storylines we've got, although we're not, because it's a huge siege.
And in addition, they are actually introducing, rather neatly, they are also introducing some extras.
Exactly. So we got already the Perpetuals, and then right at the end of this, the cherry on top, and it really is just the cherry on top.
Well, I was going to say, the just one more thing moment. Which you think surely Abaddon and the Justarian having their kicking is going to be the end of this, and that's the big moment. That's the big reveal of the book. Turns out not quite. No, as this ship comes in and we find the Saturnine fleet is hiding out, and there's still enough of them there to be an annoyance. When the ship turns up, and it's Corswain, and they're here to stand with Terra. And that's Can you imagine the furor if they'd have left it open?
Yeah,
which side they were there to support.
Yeah, I would hate to think of the memes. I just get tired of the memes as it is. But yeah, you are right. So what that's done is, okay, so now they made Dan made a big deal of there's a long way to go from the Mandeville point to Terra.
Yeah.
So I hope we're going to explore some of that in a book. So, maybe half a book's taken up by that, or even more. We've got a lot of stories still to tell, but I don't know how and when and why.
Point. Yeah, that's it. By the end of this book, we're at the halfway point, and like you, I was thinking, well, what have we got left to do? There's some massive moments have taken place already. And what have we got left to do to cover it? And clearly, we've rattled off a few here, some of the bigger ones, but I mean, there's things we don't know. To me, this has set the stage wonderfully as a node point, as a halfway point for what we're gonna see. Yeah, and they might zoom in the focus like they did in a couple of the previous books. They might zoom it out again for other bits. I can only think that Chris is going to write about the White Scars charge. Plenty of assumptions going on here. Aaron writing about Sanguinius' greatest moments, whether they both happen in the same book. Carbanda and Acre, who knows? I don't know. But then we've got 2 other books to come as well. So, yeah, and who knows if we get some more short stories. But yeah, good point. I'm sort of assuming we're going to get some extra novellas, but I'm sure we will. Maybe we won't. I'm sort of imagining there's going to be I would have 2 thought 3 more novellas. Yeah, I would have thought. 3 at least in total, I meant. But this book. So I finished reading this book, and I think it's the best 40k book. Period. A lot of people say we'll call out Necropolis from Dan for the Gaunt's Ghost series. It is a fantastic book of just so well done. Necropolis is one city with various points of impact for guardsmen against one opponent, and does it stupendously with other stories linking in as well. I kind of think of it as if this was a diving competition, Necropolis would have gone for a difficulty rating of 8 and smashed it. And by virtue of the size, complexity, of number of stories, complexity of stories, the fact that they have to feed in, like Necropolis stands within the Gaunt's Ghosts series of books that Dan wrote. And had complete control of the future of. In this, Dan has to take stories that have already been written. He has to write this story, and those stories have to influence not only the next 4 books that come, but also 40k as well, and can't overly contradict them at any point moving forwards.
and as I say, we've got 7 or 8 different kind of aspects to talk about here, plus the themes that he then has to put in. Which again, in Necropolis, he could choose how his story went. Here, he's told how his story is going to go within reason. This is a difficulty 10 dive. And
yes, I think it's undeniable that this is a much harder.
Yeah, and even if he misses,
technically harder book to
and
write.
even if he misses by a few points, he's still scoring massively high, and that is why. So you might be able to say other books are kind of better in terms of they flow and blah blah blah, and they tell everything else. I just think the overall impact of this story with the task that Dan had faced just means I don't think they'll ever top this story. If they do, amazing. And that's not to downgrade any other writer here. I love Chris Wright and I love Aaron, particularly those two I'll call out. I don't know that they're going to have an opportunity to write a Saturnine, let alone
That's an
do
interesting
it.
point. I mean, I was going to go. I think your sort of diving analogy there is a really interesting one. It's a very good one. I was going to go further and say I think it's one of, if not the best Warhammer. And we use the term Warhammer 40,000, as in Warhammer 30,000 is a part of that as well.
Yeah.
If you are a fan of the setting already, it has a major payoff for that. It relies, however, on its ties. It is not standalone by any means. Its great strength is how it ties together the many threads, and we described it as nodal in some way. That is both its incredible challenge and it's good because of how successful it is at achieving that goal, which was a hell of a goal. There are other. I would add. I echo you and I have similar tastes, I think, in these things. I echo the call-outs you make, and I would add Guy Haley to that. I think books like his Dante series, I think, is fantastic as well. But amongst many others, there are many call-out books, and they could work very well. I mean, the Eisenhorn trilogy is held up very much as a sort of a fantastic introduction to the Warhammer setting in general. I think if you gave someone this, or even Horus Rising, is this better than Horus Rising?
I think
how can
Horus
you possibly
Rising
answer that? I don't think you can. I think they
you
have
can't.
very different sets of criteria.
I think Horus Rising is probably the correct kind of analogy, in terms of so when people bring up Eisenhorn, Dan was still very new to writing novels at that time, and that doesn't detract from Eisenhorn. They are extremely fun books, but I think when you read Eisenhorn and then read Horus Rising, you appreciate how much Dan has grown as an author.
That's interesting.
And
yeah.
This is certainly not, and people have got to remember, he wrote, before he started writing those Black Library books, he was a comic book writer, and they said, do you want to write a novel? So, when sometimes there are some of his earlier books, to me, feel a bit formulaic, because they repeat themselves a little bit. That was Dan learning his craft, and there's nothing wrong with that, and I still love and enjoy those books. But I think when you look at it now, Dan is it seems to be at the peak of his powers, alongside any of the best Black Library authors you want to talk about. But then the ability to bring those stories together, and I'm trying to think. So him doing Unremembered Empire, and then this, who else has even been given half the kind of information to put into a single book that he has, and to have those stories branched off? He's been given the 2 big nodal books of this whole series, and I think that's for a reason. And I just don't think. And is it the most enjoyable book? Maybe not. Is it the book I would tell someone to read to get into any Black Library? No, not at all. But just on those factors of the difficulty of the task, the scope it encovers. Necropolis essentially would be maybe Gorgon Bar and Eternity Wall, those 2 actions, and a bit of the background stuff that Dawn has. less than half of what goes into this book, and then to do it in the space he does it in as well. This isn't a 700-800 page book either.
Yeah, or even a trilogy.
Yeah, exactly. So not only does he achieve everything that he's tasked to achieve, and he does it extremely well, and creates those moments in the right orders that escalate, but in the right way. So they're not necessarily always bigger than the one before, but they feel more important per se. He feeds us into this journey. Because at the end of it, what do you get? Abaddon, like single point of view fighting, but it feels so pivotal. To do all of that, I just don't think any other book in the Black Library compares.
No, I think these are all essential points, like you say, in achieving what it set out to do, as much as we can possibly determine that, but in terms of the set of what we might expect it to be, whilst remaining surprising in so many ways, I think it's achieved that and some across the board. Whereas there are others, but I think it rewards that being immersed in it.
Absolutely.
And it's written in that way, so and I suspect it's written knowing that it's going to reward that.
Yeah, and
it bodes hell of a well for what we've got to come.
So we knew we were going to record this, so we both went back and listened to it, didn't we? Rather than reading it, because I could do that at work and make a few notes as I'm going around. However, I read this book and then I went and bought the audio on Audible and then I listened to it, and I haven't done that ever before that quickly.
I also, because of a vast amount that Black Library is able to put out, I tend not to go back and read things a second time, because I think, well, that's time I could be spending reading something new that's coming along, and I enjoy that almost relentless pace that comes out. This is one of very few books that I've gone back and read a second time.
So
very few. In fact, it might even be the unique distinction of that, having read Black Library books since Black Library was, even before Black Library was Black Library.
So I will do that. I'm currently rereading Gaunt's Ghost, and I've got to a point where I hadn't got to before. So I've now read this once and listened to it twice. When did it come out? Just before lockdown? The limited edition? So for me, that's quite amazing. I think it's that good.
It is that good, and when that marries up with something that is as important as this series is going to be, or is, that's saying something.
And the crazy thing is, it held up on that third listen. And bearing in mind the short period of time, like, it held up. I was waiting for those moments, and they still gave me that, come on, get in there, son. They still gave me those feelings. Even when I knew they were coming and I knew what the payoff was within the context of the book. So, I just, my worry is my next Dan Abnett book. I can accept the next Dan Abnett book is probably not going to be a Saturnine. That's fine. And even if he drops 20% quality, like, it's still going to be a brilliant book. I don't think he will, because he does well in that respect.
Well, also it'll be different.
Yeah,
absolutely. It can't be measured in percentage like that. I appreciate you're just looking for a way to describe it, but it won't be, and you won't judge it by it in those terms. You will just go, well, that is as fantastic, or it's fantastic on its own merits. You won't compare them in the same way, but I think you've got to praise things, even while searching for criticisms or things it might be done differently again, if it were to be done again, with the wonderful position we sit here of either hindsight or being able to just critique these things. It's a hell of a read. Yeah,
and I am a fan. At the end of the day, I am a massive fan as well. And I wouldn't do this podcast if I didn't really enjoy what it was. I wouldn't spend 2 hours 11 minutes talking about this book if I didn't really like it. That kind of thing. So other people might be like, I didn't like the way this character was, like, in this character, and the White Skull's characters always get the bad, there's one for Pete Reese. It's always the White Skull characters, they never get the justifiable ending. I thought they were cool. I thought everything in this book was cool. And I think the characterizations and all that stuff. I'm not sure that any other Black Library authors could have written Saturnine. And not just because they write differently, but just because of everything that kind of goes into it. And that's cool. That's good. That means we get different books. Because, when when Aaron brings out whatever book he's writing, we're going to get an in-depth kind of view of characterization that Dan can't write in the same way, and that's fine.
What have we got? We've got 4 books remaining.
Yep.
We've got Chris writing one. We've got Aaron writing one. It's a
And then
reasonable
repeat.
deduction, depending on who you speak to, that Dan's writing another. There's someone else writing another, isn't there? We don't know who that is yet.
Yeah. So, we've no idea. Although, just from the way like Gav wrote, don't think it's Gav. It won't be Aaron.
Timing would suggest it wouldn't be Gav either.
Yeah. Who knows on that second one? But although there's a lot of wish listing and hoping that Dan's going to write the last one, I think there is enough to suggest that Dan is writing the last one as well. Although,
Yes.
I say, a lot of the stuff that gets put out online is just people like, well, if he doesn't write it, then we riot. But I think there's also enough in there to suggest that it is him writing the last one. We don't know. And we don't know the order, and we don't know what stories are going to take part in which books either like that. So, exciting stuff. But we talked for a long
certainly,
time.
I would echo what you said. If you've read it before, I would recommend picking it up in audio, because I think that gives you a whole different perspective on it, or not at least, which you can enjoy it a different way. And I think it's clear that we're both huge fans of the book. I think it's done a fantastic job, and it's even interesting going through and having a discussion with people about it. We were itching to do so once you read it. You're itching to kind of discuss it with other people.
And you know what? There's going to be people listening to this going, "Oh, you missed this and you missed that," and I know there's aspects I missed, and you know what? There's probably parts that I didn't know I missed as well. Yeah. And you know, some people, as I say, some people will take issue with certain aspects, and that's fine. That's cool. Come talk to us about it, because and it'll be interesting to see what we did, kind of what people think we did miss. It was really important.
I would have a conversation with anyone about this, anytime, anyway. It's the beauty of it. You love it. Anyone walks up and starts just randomly talking to you about it, that's the next 3 hours gone.
If next year I'm at the Black Library Weekender and 1 or 2 of those people in that room walk up and start talking to you about Saturnine, I'm going to remind you of this conversation.
I'm all day. Okay. I will be there. We're sat here on a weekend when probably we should be sat in the Belfry Bar having these conversations, and we're not.
Asking Dan,
my God,
exactly
do I miss
what
it?
meant. Yeah, indeed. and asking like, Aaron, how are you gonna follow that up, mate? All those questions just to put him on edge. It's poignant.
Forget Aaron in that.
Dan, how are you gonna? So was this your last book for Black Library? That's it. He's quit. Just drops Saturnine and walks out. Fantastic. I can't wait, actually. And you know what? It's weird, and maybe this is a perspective thing. I over the years, my views have changed, but how good this book was doesn't worry me about anyone mucking up going forwards. It just makes me more excited to read what they're going to write.
Agreed. I think that would be a strange.
Well, I think
but
personality
I would struggle
types
to have that view anyway. But I know what you mean. I do know what you mean. I think this is great.
It could be
in itself, but I think it sets up more than it.
There's a worry
would
for
worry.
There's a worry for some people that this is like the high benchmark. Like once you reach something, it can't be as good as this. Cool. I mean, I just don't expect any other book to be as good as this. In again those bunny ears, because good is different.
Yeah,
as
exactly.
you say.
I think
no one's
you're sort of setting yourself up like that. You that will be a self-fulfilling prophecy if you have that viewpoint. I think it's better to take them as they come, but I think this just sets up the overall arc. Look at it as part of a collective piece of work. And I mean, I've been talking to people about Solar War again recently, and that was a great book as well. And you just think they all are. I mean, they're all good in their own ways, and there's certain things you can pick out. This one has particular highlights for us. There are particular scenes that are going to go down in your memory in ways that perhaps others don't. But okay, that's fine. That should be like that, and I'm sure that will happen with events that are coming up. Well,
the beauty of the series is as well that everyone writes the books they write. They don't, like, no one's forced to try and write in the style of, like, you look through the books, they're all kind of different, like, and that's part of the beauty of having these multiple stories to tell, that we get these different voices to tell them. and that's why we've got 60 plus books plus everything else through this series, and it hasn't got stale. Some people might say it has. That's fair enough, but for me, it hasn't.
I do wonder how much this book, if not the series, probably the series, but particularly this book, has invigorated, let alone but has invigorated people into Heresy the game.
Yeah, well, that's a subject for another day, I think.
entirely.
Yeah,
but foreshadowing.
I've definitely had comments.
Is something that I think it's impacted me that way, and I can't imagine I'm alone.
No, absolutely. Awesome. Well, we'll take a break there, I reckon. We've talked long enough.
We certainly have. Thank you.
And thank you for making it to the end of another episode of The Imperial Truth. As I said at the start, we've got next episode, hopefully, providing the voice holds out. We've got a couple of guys on to talk about starting out in the Heresy, how they've done it, problems they had, etc., etc. So if you have any questions, pointers, feedback, anything like that, then feel free to contact me, Greg, at theimperialtruth.com. All the other links are in the show notes. I won't go over them all over again for once. But yeah, we're always looking for feedback and anything like that. Feel free to get hold of me, and hopefully that will all help the show out. One thing you can do if you do want to support the show, we have Patreon, we have a shop, you can buy your merch, you can go to Element, and you can go use Geek Shield as well. But one thing I don't really push for that often really is ratings and reviews. Now on iTunes or wherever you listen, however you listen to your podcasts, if you do that, then it just helps other people maybe get a little bit of an idea of what's going on, but also helps the algorithms and lets us appear a little bit more than we would otherwise. And that hopefully, again, just brings more people into our little community, which is all good. Now, because of my voice and not feeling particularly great, I am going to leave this one fairly short, I think. So, as I say, get hold of us with anything you want, and we'll be back soon. Until next time, you have been listening to The Imperial Truth.